Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. Before we begin, if you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've had any strange or unexplained experiences of your own, you can send them to me. Our first story tonight is about a family living in a house where several people have seen shadows, childlike figures, and other things they couldn't explain. The activity seems to come and go, sometimes disappearing for months. They think it may be connected to a spirit game played years ago. Settle in, and I hope you sleep well tonight. I've wanted to tell someone about this for a long time, because there have been several strange incidents in my family home, and I still don't know what to make of them. Let me describe the house first, because the layout matters. It's a large two-story home with two main entrances on adjoining sides. When you enter through the front door, there are 3 bedrooms lined up along one wall, with another room farther across the hall. A staircase rises beside the entrance, and the center of the house opens into a wide living area. From downstairs, you can see parts of the upper floor because the landing overlooks the hall. The house is fairly new, but the land has belonged to our family for many years. According to my relatives, everything may have started one evening when my mother and 2 of my aunts decided to play a spirit calling game. They arranged letters and numbers on the floor, placed a glass in the center, and used it almost like a homemade Ouija board. They believed they contacted something. At first, they treated it like harmless fun, but the answers became disturbingly accurate. It supposedly predicted the result of an important civil service examination, and even warned that a relative's engagement would end badly. Both things later happened exactly as described. Then, someone became frightened and left before the session was properly closed. My family has always wondered whether whatever they invited simply stayed behind. The first incident I personally experienced happened years later. My mother, one of my aunts, and I were sitting in the middle bedroom. They were watching videos on their phones, while I was lying nearby with my headphones on, scrolling without paying much attention to anything around me. Suddenly, a vivid image appeared in my mind. It wasn't a normal thought or something I was deliberately imagining. I saw a solid, human-shaped figure rising from behind a large blue water container in the bathroom. It was completely black, with a clear outline, almost like a person made from shadow. In the vision, it stepped out of the bathroom and moved across the room. At that exact moment, my aunt looked up sharply. Neither of us said anything at first. Then we both spoke to my mother. My aunt said she had just seen a dark figure move out of the bathroom and disappear behind the tall mirror near the wall. What frightened us most was that our descriptions matched. I hadn't told her what I had seen in my mind, and she hadn't told me what she had seen with her eyes. We left the room almost immediately. Another incident happened during a season of severe storms. A family we were close to temporarily stayed with us because their neighborhood had flooded. One evening, their oldest son remained home while everyone else attended a celebration. He went into the bedroom across the hall and saw what looked like a small child peeking from behind a refrigerator. He thought one of the younger children was hiding there, so he stepped closer. The figure vanished. There was no child in the room, and there wasn't enough space behind the refrigerator for anyone to hide. One of my aunts later saw a child-sized figure walking slowly down the staircase near the entrance. She watched it descend several steps before it disappeared in front of her. On another occasion, she looked up from the ground floor and saw a tall black shape leaning over the railing upstairs, staring down at her. My mother has had experiences too. One night, at around 1 in the morning, she was alone in the kitchen eating a late meal. The kitchen window was covered by thin curtains, and she noticed something moving behind them. At first, she assumed it was someone passing outside. Then, a pale shape seemed to press close to the curtain from the other side. When she pulled the curtain back, there was nobody there. One of the most frightening incidents involved the two entrance doors. My mother, my cousin, and I were sitting in the bedroom closest to the front of the house when someone knocked extremely hard on the main door. A relative of ours often visited late at night, so we assumed it was him. My cousin walked to the entrance and called out, but no one answered. Then all three of us stood near the door. Another heavy knock struck the wood directly in front of us. 2 or 3 seconds later, the second entrance door, on the other side of the house, was hit with the same force. There was no realistic way for someone to move between those doors that quickly. We checked the security cameras afterward. No person appeared on either recording. There have also been many smaller incidents. Family members have felt something brush past them or touch their backs when no one was standing nearby. It has happened to me several times. The sensation is quick, almost like someone tapping you and pulling their hand away before you can turn around. Last year, the activity became more intense for a while. Almost every night, we heard cupboards opening and slamming shut. Sometimes it sounded as though someone was dragging furniture across an empty room. The entrance door would also shake beneath loud knocks, but whenever we checked, no one was outside. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. That is how these incidents usually happen. Months may pass with nothing unusual at all. The house feels completely peaceful. Then the activity returns in clusters, almost like episodes, before disappearing again. What confuses me is that the house itself is only around 8 years old. However, my family lived on this land long before the current house was built, and my parents say strange events happened here even then. I try to consider ordinary explanations: old pipes, animals, shifting wood, electrical problems, imagination, or even people playing tricks. But some incidents happened to several people at the same moment. Others were captured as sounds without anyone appearing on the cameras, and the experiences don't seem to repeat under the same natural conditions. I don't know whether this is connected to the spirit calling game, the land itself, or something completely different. I'm not trying to convince anyone that I know exactly what it is. I just want to understand what might be happening in our home, and whether there is a safe, sensible way to identify the cause. I lived in that house for nearly 12 years, and when you stay somewhere that long, you collect a lot of memories. Some are ordinary, some are comforting, and some stay with you because, even years later, you still cannot explain them. For most of my life, I was skeptical about ghosts. Whenever something strange happened, I blamed exhaustion, anxiety, bad dreams, or the mind playing tricks in the dark. Even now, I am not completely sure what I believe. But after I moved several hours away, something changed. I started sleeping better. My health improved. The nightmares became less frequent. That was when I began wondering whether something had truly been wrong with the old house. About 6 weeks before I moved out, I experienced one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I woke up suddenly and threw the blankets off me. My heart was pounding so hard that I grabbed my chest with both hands. I had this overwhelming certainty that someone was standing nearby and was about to attack me. There was no sound, no figure, nothing I could point to, just fear. It felt so real that I stayed awake until sunrise with the lights on. I had never experienced a night terror that intense before, and I have not experienced one like it since. A few years earlier, I had what I believe was my only episode of sleep paralysis. I woke up lying flat on my back, unable to move. When I looked toward the corner beside my bed, I saw a small figure standing there. It was about the height of a young child. The figure wore something that looked like a narrow, floor-length robe. The fabric was so dark that its body seemed to disappear into the shadows around it. Its face was the worst part. I could not see any eyes, mouth, or recognizable features. Everything appeared to twist and fold inward, almost as though the face were slowly turning inside itself. I remember blinking as hard as I could. A moment later, I was able to sit up, and the figure was gone. People often describe sleep paralysis as being trapped somewhere between dreaming and waking, but I remember feeling completely conscious. I could hear both fans running beside my bed. I could feel the warm air in the room. I knew exactly where I was. That is what made it so unsettling. I was not the only person who noticed strange things there. My uncle stayed with us for part of one winter. One night, shortly after midnight, he was lying in the guest room and had almost fallen asleep when he felt someone tap him on the shoulder. Not once, but 3 times. He assumed it was someone in the family trying to wake him. When he turned around, the room was empty. The door was still closed and everyone else was asleep. My father also mentioned seeing something in the kitchen late one evening. He laughed while telling the story and said it was probably just a shadow, but he described the outline of an elderly man walking past the counter. He spoke about it like a joke, but his expression never quite matched his voice. There were smaller incidents too. Sometimes while I was lying in bed and beginning to drift off, something would strike the mattress near my feet. I would hear a dull thump and feel the vibration travel through the bed, almost like someone had slapped the side of it. Every time I would sit up and check the room, there was never anything there. My physical health also seemed different in that house. Not long after we moved in, I began experiencing waves of nausea and stomach pain. I started keeping antacid tablets nearby because I needed them so often. The symptoms improved slightly over the years, but they never disappeared completely. Then I moved away. Within a few months, I realized I was barely using the medication anymore. My stomach was calmer than it had been in years. The same thing happened with my dreams. In the old house, I had vivid nightmares several times a week. Many involved enormous storms, dark hallways, or being trapped inside the home where I grew up. They felt painfully real, and I would often wake up exhausted. Since leaving, those dreams have become rare. Even when I do have nightmares, they no longer carry the same weight. There may be a reasonable explanation for all of it. Perhaps the house produced low-frequency vibrations from old machinery or nearby traffic. Some people believe those sounds can cause anxiety, nausea, and feelings of being watched. There could also have been poor ventilation, mold, or a small carbon monoxide leak that was never detected. I honestly hope it was something like that. Still, I cannot ignore how different life felt once I left. That house never looked frightening. From the outside, it was just an ordinary home on a quiet street. But inside, especially at night, it always felt as though the rooms were holding their breath. And sometimes, when I remember that little figure beside my bed, I wonder whether the house was ever truly empty. I should probably start by saying that I've never considered myself superstitious. I don't usually believe in signs, haunted places, or things that can't be explained. But a few years ago, I was driving home after spending several days helping relatives in northern Georgia. It was late, well after dark, and my GPS had taken me onto a series of quiet back roads somewhere in southern Illinois. That was when I came across the town. I remember the road changing beneath my tires. The pavement became old red brick, circling a small town square. There were shops lining both sides of the street, little family-owned places with painted signs and carefully arranged window displays. In the center stood a large stone building that looked like a courthouse or town hall, with a park and several tall trees in front of it. Everything looked maintained, not abandoned, not run down. It looked like a town where people still lived and worked. But there wasn't anyone there. The street lights were on. The shop windows were glowing. A few signs even said, "Open." Still, I didn't see a single person or moving vehicle. Almost immediately, every instinct in my body told me to leave. It wasn't ordinary nervousness. It felt deeper than that, like my body had noticed something before my mind could understand it. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, my chest went cold, and one thought kept repeating itself inside my head. "You are not supposed to be here." As I drove around the square, I became certain that something was watching me. I kept glancing toward the windows, the trees, and the dark spaces between the buildings, but I never saw anything. Each time I tried to look more closely, the fear became stronger. It didn't feel like I was being followed. It felt like I had already been found. I wanted to speed, but I was terrified of stopping or attracting attention, so I drove exactly as fast as the posted limit allowed. The moment I passed the sign marking the edge of town, the pressure disappeared. My shoulders relaxed. I could breathe again, and the certainty that I was about to die simply vanished. Later, I tried to find the town on a map. I checked my phone's location history, the route saved in my car, and every nearby road I called identify. There was nothing. No town square, no courthouse, no brick roads, no collection of shops matching what I remembered. The strangest part is the name. I know I saw it on a sign when I entered. I remember thinking it was an unusual name, but whenever I try to bring it back into focus, a sharp pain begins behind my eyes. Sometimes it becomes a full headache. Other times it feels like tiny needles pressing into my vision. The harder I try to remember, the worse it gets. And then that feeling returns. The closest way I can describe it is the sensation of being seen as prey by something so powerful that you barely deserve its attention. It knows where you are. It knows what you're thinking. And the only reason you're still alive is because it hasn't decided otherwise. Sometimes I wonder whether the thing blocking my memory is protecting the town from me. Other times, I think it may be protecting me from whatever lives there. When I'm not thinking about the town, the presence feels distant and almost harmless. But when I try to remember the buildings, the road, or the name on that sign, I can feel it nearby. Waiting. Watching. Making sure the memory stays buried. Even speaking about this now, I can feel that pressure beginning behind my eyes. I don't know what you are, or why that town must remain hidden. Maybe there are things people were never meant to find. Maybe forgetting is the only reason I was allowed to leave. And somehow, the most frightening part is that I understand the warning. Whatever is keeping that place out of my mind, I won't fight you anymore. Keep the name. Keep the road. Keep every last memory of that town. Because deep down, I know that if I ever remember everything, you'll come for me. And I think I already agreed to let you. I must have been 15 when all of this happened. Back then, my family lived in an old neighborhood near the center of Lahore. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Doors were rarely locked during the day, children wandered between houses without asking permission, and neighbors often felt more like relatives. Directly across from us lived Captain Dr. Shabazz Wasim and his only son, Dr. Zayan Wasim. Dr. Shabazz was a retired army physician, a deeply religious and gentle man who had spent most of his life serving others. His wife had died when Zayan was still a baby, and he had never remarried. Zayan followed his father into medicine, though he chose a different path. After finishing medical school, he moved abroad to specialize in women's health. When he returned to Pakistan in his early 30s, he began planning a small hospital dedicated to his late mother. To me, Zion was extraordinary. He was intelligent, of course, but that was not what impressed me most. He listened carefully. He never made people feel foolish, even when they knew far less than he did. He could talk about medicine, history, philosophy, or politics, yet somehow make every subject feel personal. He once told me, "History doesn't repeat itself exactly. People do. Fear, love, pride, grief. Those things keep returning in different clothes." At 15, I thought that was the wisest thing anyone had ever said. Within a few months, Zion became the older brother I had always wished for. We ate lunch together after school, watched old movies, and spent long evenings discussing questions I was probably too young to understand. Then, one evening, Zion and his father were invited to a family wedding. Since they had no one else accompanying them, Zion asked me to come along. The wedding was held in a beautiful garden filled with strings of golden lights. Music drifted through the warm evening air, and the tables were covered with more food than I had ever seen in one place. That was where Zion met Samira. She was the bride's younger cousin, 26 years old, soft-spoken and thoughtful. She studied psychology and loved discussing philosophy, which immediately caught Zion's attention. I watched them speak for nearly an hour. Neither of them seemed aware that anyone else was present. Samira had warm hazel eyes and a peaceful way of looking at people, as though she was giving them her complete attention. Zion, who was normally composed, kept losing his train of thought whenever she smiled. I had never seen him like that before. 4 months later, they were married. Their home changed almost overnight. It became brighter, louder, and warmer. Dr. Shabazz loved Samira as if she were his own daughter, and Zion seemed happier than I had ever known him to be. About a year later, Samira gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Sahir, a name inspired by both of his parents. He was a cheerful child with his mother's eyes. My own mother adored him and found a reason to visit their house almost every day. For a while, their little family seemed untouched by sorrow. Then, when Sahir was only 6 months old, everything changed. One afternoon, Samira went into the kitchen to warm his milk. There was a gas leak inside the old oven beneath the stove. The moment she lit the burner, the gas ignited. The explosion shook several houses. Samira survived for 2 days in the hospital, but her injuries were too severe. When she died, it felt as though the entire neighborhood had lost someone. The funeral was almost silent. People tried to speak, but their words dissolved into tears. Samira had not lived among us for very long, yet she had somehow become part of everyone's life. Some people leave behind more than memories. They leave an absence that changes the shape of a room. After her death, Zion buried himself in work. He spent nearly every waking hour at his clinic or overseeing the construction of the hospital. Sometimes he would leave before sunrise and return long after midnight. He rarely held Sahir. I don't believe he blamed the child. I think looking at Sahir simply reminded him too much of Samira. Our houses faced each other across a narrow street. My bedroom was upstairs at the front of our home, directly opposite Zion and Samira's old room. Both rooms had balconies. Before the accident, I would often see them sitting outside together in the evening, drinking tea while Sahir slept inside. About 6 weeks after Samira's death, I was reading on my balcony near sunset. The street was growing dark when a light suddenly appeared across from me. The lamp in Zion's bedroom had been switched on. The curtains were closed, so I couldn't see inside. I assumed Zion had returned early. 2 minutes later, the light went out. What bothered me was that the rest of the house remained completely dark. Dr. Shabazz always turned on the downstairs lights before sunset, even if he was only sitting in one room. A little later, my mother called me down for dinner. When I entered the living room, Dr. Shabazz was sitting there with Sahir in his arms. I stopped in the doorway. "How long have you been here?" I asked. My mother looked puzzled. "Nearly 2 hours," she said. "Is Zayan at home?" Dr. Shabazz shook his head. "He left for Islamabad this morning. He won't return until Monday." I told them about the light. The three of us immediately crossed the street, convinced that someone had broken into the house. We checked every room. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. Nothing had been moved. There was no one inside. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was only the beginning. After that evening, the bedroom light began switching on almost every night. It would remain on for a minute or two, then turn off. Sometimes, when the house was empty, lights would move through it in sequence. First, the upstairs bedroom, then the hallway, then the living room, finally, the kitchen. Soon, other neighbors noticed it too. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony when the bedroom light came on again. This time, there was a shadow behind the curtain, the outline of a woman. She stood at the window for several seconds before turning away. My entire body went cold. The height was the same. The posture was the same. Even the slow way she moved reminded me of Samira. A moment later, the upstairs light went out. At exactly the same instant, the light in the downstairs living room came on. No human being could have reached it that quickly. The next morning, I woke with a fever. When Dr. Shabazz came to check on me, I told him what I had seen. He sat quietly for a long time. Then he admitted that strange things had been happening inside the house as well. He often heard bare footsteps moving through the hallway. Sometimes he smelled Samira's perfume. Once, while Sahir was playing alone in the living room, Dr. Shabazz heard a woman speaking gently to him. The voice sounded exactly like Samira's. Sahir laughed the way he used to laugh when his mother played with him. Zayan had experienced it too. One night, Dr. Shabazz found him sitting on the bedroom floor, crying so hard that he could barely breathe. Zayan said he had felt Samira's hand against his face. He had heard her whisper his name. He thought grief was destroying his mind. For several days, they convinced themselves that everything could be explained. The footsteps were the house settling. The perfume was trapped in the curtains. The voices were memories created by exhaustion. Then something happened that none of us could explain. One morning, Dr. Shabazz asked my mother and me to watch Sahir while he and Zayan traveled to another city for a medical emergency. We stayed with the baby in their house. Everything seemed normal, except Sahir refused his bottle. My mother tried feeding him in the morning. He turned his face away. She tried again in the afternoon and several more times during the evening. He would not drink a single drop. Strangely, he did not seem hungry. He remained cheerful and energetic, laughing and playing as usual. By 10 that night, my mother became frightened. She called Zayan and asked when Sahir had last eaten. "Around 1 in the morning," he said. My mother's voice began to tremble. "That was 21 hours ago. He hasn't taken any milk all day." Zayan and his father immediately began driving home. They arrived about 40 minutes later. We were all gathered in the upstairs bedroom when Dr. Shabazz lifted Sahir onto the bed and gently pressed his stomach. His expression changed. He asked for his medical bag and placed a stethoscope against the child's abdomen. After listening carefully, he looked at Zayan. "He's full," he whispered. No one spoke. Zayan examined Sahir himself. The baby had eaten recently. Not a little. His stomach was completely full. My mother and I had been beside him the entire day. No one else had entered the house, and there was no milk missing from any of the bottles. We all understood what it seemed to mean. None of us had the courage to say it aloud. 2 months later, Zayan, Dr. Shabazz, and Sahir moved overseas. They never returned to live in that house. Years have passed since then. Sahir is a teenager now, healthy, bright, and full of energy. He plays basketball for his school and wants to study medicine someday. Zayan has told him everything about his mother. He knows what she looked like. He knows how she laughed. He knows how deeply she loved him. And although Sahir cannot remember being held by her, a part of me believes that, on one impossible night in that silent house, Samira came back to care for her child one final time. I must have been 6 or 7 when this happened. We were still living in our old apartment building, and even now, part of me wants to believe it was some strange childhood hallucination. You know, the kind of thing a young mind creates before it fully understands the world. But honestly, I've never been able to convince myself of that. It was a cold afternoon in early December. My dad had mentioned that we needed to bring our box of Christmas decorations up from the basement. The basement was shared by everyone in the building, and getting there meant walking down several flights of stairs and through a long, concrete hallway. A few hours later, I heard my dad call to me from outside my bedroom. He told me it was time to go downstairs. Then he asked me to stop at the apartment below ours and check whether the elderly couple living there needed anything brought up. What felt strange was that he never opened my door. My dad always came into my room when he wanted something. He never spoke through the door. But that afternoon, his voice stayed on the other side. I didn't think much of it at the time. I went downstairs, knocked on the neighbor's door, and asked if they needed help. They said no, so I turned around and headed back toward our apartment. That was when I saw my dad standing on the landing. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile or say anything at all. He simply turned and began walking down the stairs. I followed him. At first, I thought he might be tired, but after a few steps, I noticed something was wrong with the way he moved. His body seemed unusually heavy, almost as though he were dragging himself forward. His shoulders leaned to one side, and he swayed every time he placed a foot on the next step. The whole stairwell was silent except for one sound. Keys. I could hear them jingling inside his coat pocket with every slow, uneven step. By the time we reached the basement, I was frightened, but I still didn't understand why. He stopped directly in front of the basement door and stood completely still. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, and his face was turned toward the lock. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I don't have the key." I remember staring at him, confused. I had heard those keys the entire way down. My dad kept every key he owned on the same large key ring. The apartment key, the mailbox key, the storage key, all of them. There was no reason he wouldn't have had it. For a moment, I thought he might be sick. Maybe he was confused or having some kind of medical emergency. The way he was standing made him look less like my father and more like someone pretending to be him. I panicked. I turned and ran back up the stairs as fast as I could. Halfway up, I looked over my shoulder. He hadn't moved. He was still standing in front of the basement door in the exact same position, staring at the lock. That image has stayed with me my entire life. When I reached our apartment, I rushed into my parents' bedroom, crying and shouting that something was wrong with Dad. I said he was downstairs, that he couldn't walk properly, and that he was acting strange. Before my mom could respond, my dad stepped into the room from the kitchen. He looked completely normal. I remember staring at him, unable to speak. He told me he had been inside the apartment for most of the afternoon. In fact, he said he had already carried the Christmas decorations upstairs earlier that morning. He insisted that he had never called me from outside my room, and he had never gone down to the basement with me. For years, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe I had imagined seeing him because I expected him to be there. Maybe my childhood mind had stitched together a memory that never really happened. but I can still hear those keys jingling, and I can still see that figure standing motionless in front of the basement door. Whatever followed me downstairs that afternoon looked exactly like my father, but I don't believe it was him. You know, this story isn't mine to tell originally. It belongs to my dad, but I've always felt it's worth sharing, especially because of how oddly real it felt to him, even though he's not one for ghost stories or anything supernatural. So here it goes, straight from him. My dad, he was a builder by trade. He had a contract with the local council here in the UK, and that meant the work wasn't just on public buildings, but also on council homes and flats. Now, these flats, when no one's living in them, are called voids, basically empty buildings waiting for the next chapter. When these flats are empty, the council puts up these big, heavy metal doors, locking everything tight to stop thieves or squatters from sneaking in. And you'd need a special set of keys from the council to get inside. One day, my dad was told his next job would be at one of these flat buildings. It was a fairly large place, 3 floors, multiple rooms spread across each level. Curious and wanting to get a feel for the job ahead so he wouldn't be caught off guard, he decided to go and have a look around before starting. He got inside, using the council keys, of course, and stepped into this empty shell of a place. There were 4 rooms on the ground floor, 4 more on the second, and another 4 on the third floor. A staircase connected each level, but it wasn't a regular staircase. It had this open central shaft running right through the middle, so you could look up and see all the way to the top floor from the ground. The stairs had metal bar railings, cold and uninviting, adding to the emptiness and echoing silence. He took it all in, the space, the peeling plaster, the faded paint. A big job, but manageable. He figured a few days of work to gut the place, replaster some walls, and then repaint. As he was about to lock up and leave, he suddenly felt it. That prickling sensation that someone was standing right behind him. Now, my dad's been around enough empty buildings to know that sometimes locals, curious or maybe looking for something to take, might sneak in or watch builders. So naturally, he spun around and said, "Mate, you're going to have to leave. I'm locking up." But here's the weird part. There was no one there. No footprints, no shadows, just empty air. His heart ticked a little faster, but he shrugged it off as just an odd feeling, locked up, and went home. That night, he told my mom about it. Not in a dramatic way, just as a passing remark, like, "Yeah, something weird happened today." And that was it. No big fuss. The weekend went by, quiet and uneventful. But come Monday, my dad and his mate Martin went back to the flat to start the real work. As they were getting set up, a local resident stopped by to ask how things were going. They said everything was fine, made some small talk, and then the man's tone shifted. "It's a shame what happened in there, isn't it?" he said. Now, my dad and Martin exchanged confused looks. "A shame? What do you mean?" The local went on, voice low and somber. "A few months back, a young girl came home from school and found her dad. He'd tied himself to the railing and jumped down the stairwell. That moment, you could almost hear the cold air thicken. My dad felt that shiver, the one that crawls up your spine when something just doesn't sit right. He didn't tell the local man about the feeling he'd had the week before, but he did confide in Martin. And Martin, being sensible, refused to go into the building alone after that. They both agreed that from then on, they'd make sure to leave the central door open while working, to keep an easy exit just in case. Now, here's the thing about my dad. He's the kind of man who'd tell you straight up he doesn't believe in ghosts. He's never claimed to have seen one, not once. But he'll also tell you this experience was the strangest, most inexplicable thing that's ever happened to him. That feeling of being watched when no one was there. that sudden spike of cold dread, and the tragic story behind the place. It all left a mark on him. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the evening shadows grow long, he'll pause and say, "I can't explain what I felt in that flat, but it's not something I'll ever forget." So yeah, that's the story. A silent presence in an empty flat, a tragic past echoing in the stillness, and two men who made sure to respect the weight of both as they carried on with their work. You know, when I was really little, like around 4 or 5 years old, I used to have these conversations with what I later learned were called ghosts. My parents just told me about it recently, and honestly, it kind of blew my mind. They said I would always talk to this man who stood right outside my bedroom window. When they asked me who I was chatting with, I'd say, "Jeffrey." Now, I don't remember any of these talks at all, but my parents do. We lived next to this elderly gentleman named Mr. Todd, who was quite close to my family. My mom got curious one day and asked Mr. Todd who had lived in our house before us. Without hesitation, he said, "Jeffrey." When my mom asked if Jeffrey had anything to do with the window by my bedroom, Mr. Todd nodded and explained that Jeffrey would spend most of his days standing there, just gazing out the window. It's strange, right? To think that as a tiny kid, I was holding conversations with a man who'd quietly watch from that very spot. But that wasn't the only ghost I talked to. My folks tell me I would also chat with a man who perched on top of the wardrobe. Now, I never got much detail about that one because the whole Jeffrey story kind of overshadowed it. And there's more. Apparently, I used to talk about having a past life, bringing up stories about my other family. I've got this feeling, deep down, that my past life was somewhere around the time of the World Wars. My older brother, he's 7 years older than me, once told me that I suddenly started singing an old wartime song word for word. Neither my parents nor he had ever heard it before. It all feels so fascinating, this connection to a past I can't fully grasp. It's a little frustrating too because I was so young that those memories have slipped away like mist. Fast forward to a much more recent moment that still sends chills down my spine. It was the night of September 7th, just a few months ago. I was in my room, alone, around 1:30 in the morning, chatting with my girlfriend on the phone. The house was silent except for us, and I had my room pitch black, lights off, nothing but the glow of my phone screen lighting up my face. We usually call each other every night to fall asleep together, even if we're apart, so this was just another normal conversation. But then, right in the middle of her telling me about her day at work, I heard something. It was faint, a very low voice whispering, or maybe mumbling, something from the direction of my door. It was so quiet that I couldn't make out the words, but I knew it was definitely speech. I told my girlfriend to be quiet for a moment so I could listen. At first, I thought it was my brother. His room is right next to mine, but he was already asleep, and I knew because he always follows the same bedtime routine. Uses the bathroom just outside our rooms, flips off the hallway light, shuts his door, and turns off his light. Plus, his voice isn't that deep, and I'm familiar with the sound from hearing him chat with his friends on Discord. This voice? It wasn't him. It sounded like someone, or something, was standing just outside my door, maybe even inside the room, but when I shone my phone's flashlight around, I saw nothing. I stayed still in bed, trying to peer into the dark corners. After a few minutes, I figured I'd had enough and told my girlfriend we should get some sleep. The whole time, I kept thinking about how strange that voice had been. So close, so real, yet invisible. The next morning, everything was normal again, and nothing spooky has happened since. But I still remember that night clearly, the whisper that didn't belong. Now here's a story about my mom that caught me completely off guard. She's always been a staunch skeptic, never one to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. But just yesterday, she told me this story from work that had her rattled. She works as a dispenser in a pharmacy, and she has a colleague who's also skeptical, but curious about the paranormal. This colleague told my mom about an experience she had at a graveyard. She and a friend went there to visit a loved one's grave, and they were the only ones there. Suddenly, they heard a woman humming softly. They thought maybe someone was tending to a grave, so they looked around. They followed the sound but found no one. They even checked their phones and devices. Nothing. Feeling a little uneasy, they left for a nearby pub to grab some food. While eating and chatting, they suddenly both fell silent at the same time. They heard the humming again, so clear it sent a shiver down their spines. Eventually, they parted ways and went home. Later that night, my mom's colleague got a frantic call from her friend. She was hysterical, crying over the phone, saying she'd heard the same humming inside her own house. Trying to calm her down, my mom's colleague reassured her it was probably just her imagination. But then, after hanging up, she went upstairs to bed, and there it was again. The humming. My mom wasn't too convinced at first, brushing it off as just a story. But then, as she left the room and walked down the long hallway toward the stairs, she heard a female humming right behind her. It was different notes this time, lasting just 2 or 3 seconds. She spun around, half laughing, thinking her colleague was messing with her. But no one was there. Her colleague was still in the room they'd left behind, too far away to have made the noise, and no one else was on that floor. There was no PA system, no speakers, and my mom wasn't carrying her phone or anything that could have made the sound. I've never seen my mom so shaken. She's always been the practical, down-to-earth type who tries to explain everything logically. This experience really rattled her, and honestly, I'm at a loss too. What do you think it could have been? Stories like these, my childhood talks with Jeffrey, the whisper in my room, and my mom's eerie humming in the hallway, they all remind me how much mystery there still is in the world. Sometimes the unseen brushes so close to us, whispering secrets just beyond our reach. And even if we can't fully understand, those moments leave their mark, like faint echoes of a story waiting to be told. Hey, I want to share something really personal with you. A story that's been with my family for as long as I can remember. And it all started with my grandma. You know, she had this dream that haunted her from when she was just a little girl, around 4 years old, and it stayed with her all the way up until the final 2 weeks of her life. It's one of those dreams that just won't let go. So picture this. My grandma is walking down this long gravel road, but there's absolutely nothing around her. No trees, no houses, just endless nothingness. Sometimes the sky above her would be this stunning, fiery sunset that could take your breath away. Other times, it was just heavy, gray clouds pressing down like a thick blanket. And every so often, far off in the distance, there would be this huge, crumbling barn, old and worn down, almost like a ghost of a place. But most of the time, it was just her, alone, walking this empty road. The strangest thing? Whenever she had the dream, she saw herself at the same age she was in real life, but everything, her coat, the sky, even the gravel, was in black and white. No color at all. She used to say it made her feel sad, like when she dreamed of herself at 20 and the coat she loved was only gray, not the deep blue she remembered. It was like the color was missing from her life in the dream, and that absence felt heavy. Now, I'm the oldest grandkid, and the only one who spent nights at their house, lived with them for a while, and visited all the time. So, the first time I had that dream, I was about 11. It was just like hers, all monochrome, and I remember seeing my grandma only a few steps ahead of me on that road. I wanted to call out to her, to ask where we were going or why we were there, but I just couldn't bring myself to speak. It was like the silence was part of the dream's power. When I woke up, I was crying. I was staying at their house, so the next morning I told my grandma about it. She was always a quiet, reserved woman, very private, and honestly, she worried a lot about what others thought of her. So she just brushed it off, told me not to worry, and didn't really talk about it again. Years later, when I was in my early 20s, we had this rare, quiet afternoon together, and she opened up about those dreams, how she'd been having them her whole life. I was a little frustrated at first. I asked her why she never believed me back then. She looked at me, a little scared, and said, "Because it scared me." That simple, honest answer stuck with me. My grandma passed away in 2019. I wasn't there when she went, for a bunch of reasons. Our relationship was complicated, tense at times, sometimes strained. But now, as I near 50, I see so clearly how fiercely she loved me. She did the best she could. She was an amazing woman, but it breaks my heart that she couldn't be more for herself, that she held so much back. Neither of us ever figured out what those dreams meant. Most of the time, one of us would have the dream just a day or two before the other. It was like our minds were connected in this quiet, mysterious way. We never told anyone about it. She was afraid people would think we were lying or strange. I only had that dream once after she passed. It was in April, just after her birthday. I'm a big walker, and in the days leading up to the dream, something strange happened. I was surrounded by monarch butterflies on my walks. So many of them, more than I'd ever seen before, especially in August, which is unusual where I live in the Adirondacks. My grandma used to say that if you see a monarch, especially a yellow one, it's her stopping by to say hello and remind you she loves you. It felt like she was with me. The dreams were always unsettling, filled with fear. But that fear wasn't just mine or hers. My grandma was a devoted Roman Catholic, and she was scared of anything she didn't understand. I, on the other hand, have felt this strange connection to the paranormal since I was 6. For me, those odd experiences were a way to feel close to my grandma, to connect with her in a way I desperately needed. In a way, those dreams gave me permission to hold space for her fears, to let her find some peace she couldn't find in waking life. And that means so much to me. It's like we're crushing old karma, or lightening the weight of those Akashic records. I'm grateful I could be there for her in that way, even if we never fully understood it. Sometimes love is about holding each other's fears and walking those long, gray roads together, even when the colors are missing. Hey, I want to share with you a story from when I was really little, about 4 years old. I've had these strange, unexplainable experiences my whole life. Things like sightings, dreams that felt more real than dreams, and even premonitions. But this one is one of the very first memories I have, and it still sticks with me. So, we lived in this cedar-sided split foyer house perched right on top of a mountain. The kind of place where the wind whistles through the trees and the night feels a little thicker somehow. I had a younger brother who was just 10.5 months younger than me, so we were really close. We shared a bedroom that was just across the hall from our parents' room. Now, something really strange happened there. We kept seeing this figure, a shadowy shape, so often that, honestly, we just got used to it. It stood about 3 to 4 feet tall and had the general shape of a teddy bear, but with this classic Viking helmet complete with horns. We could never make out any facial features, just this dark, shadowy outline that somehow was always there, watching us. It was like part of the house. One night, our older cousins, just a year or two older, came over for a sleepover. All of us kids were sprawled out in a circle on the floor of our room, our sleeping bags forming a colorful ring. The lights were still on, which made the whole scene feel cozy, yet alive with possibility. Suddenly, one of my cousins whispered, "What is that?" And he pointed right at the creature standing silently in the doorway, just watching us. I remember telling him, "That's just our monster. He watches us play. He can't hurt us." I even stuck my tongue out at it, trying to show my cousin that it was harmless. My mom always told us monsters couldn't get us, so I felt pretty brave around it. But then, just a few nights later, something happened that changed everything. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was sleeping on the top bunk, my little brother on the bottom. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the moon sneaking in through the curtains. I blinked a few times and saw the creature climbing up the ladder to my bed. My heart was pounding, but somehow I found the courage to move over to the ladder and sit down right in front of it, blocking its path. We were so close, just inches from each other's faces. It felt like we sat there forever. I kept thinking, what is this? Why can't I see its real face? Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and tapped its shoulder. And that's when all hell broke loose. The moment my fingers touched it, I could see everything. The whole body was covered in dozens of monster heads, writhing and shifting. Its main face, it had these huge, haunting eyes and razor-sharp teeth. The creature looked terrified and confused. It was in so much pain from my touch that it grabbed me by the back and tore into my skin. I could feel it scream right in my face. It was a scream of agony and fear. I started screaming hysterically, desperate to get away. I broke free and crawled to the far end of my bed, clutching my back where it had scratched me. Then, I started praying, trying to calm down, and my screams slowly faded. By this time, my mom had rushed in, alarmed by the noise. All I could manage to say was, "Monster." The next morning, my mom made me come into the kitchen to show her best friend the scratches on my back. Years later, she told me how scared she was because those scratches hadn't been there the night before bedtime. They were fresh. I asked my cousin years later about that night. Even after 30 years, he still remembered it and confessed that when I stuck my tongue out at the creature, he was absolutely terrified. My brother, too, described the same creepy-looking figure after a similar encounter he had shortly after mine. He saw it on our basement stairs, and it screamed at him. After my encounter, I never saw that creature again. But now, my own 3-year-old son is scared of shadows. He knows the difference between normal shadows and the one that he says walks around in his room. I can't help but wonder, is it the same thing? What exactly is that shadow? What is it that's been watching us all these years? I don't have the answers, but I do know one thing. Sometimes, the things we're most afraid of are the ones that are just misunderstood, waiting silently in the dark. Hey, I want to share something personal with you. Something that's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. These strange, unexplainable experiences that, honestly, have always made my family a little unsettled. My mom even tells me that when I was a kid, I used to genuinely scare her with the things I would say and see. It's like I've always had this connection to things others just don't notice. Just the other day, something happened with my little boy. He's just 2 years old, and I can't shake it off. We were in his room, just sitting together in his little rocking chair, reading one of his favorite books. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of the chair as I gently rocked back and forth. Suddenly, he stopped looking at the colorful pages and stared intently across the room. Then, He pointed with this mix of curiosity and a little fear and said, "Ghost, Mom." Now, we had just gone through Halloween, and he's only recently started to understand the idea of ghosts, so I smiled and said, "Yes, Halloween ghosts are spooky, aren't they?" But then, with a little more urgency, he corrected me. "No, Mom, a guy, a ghost, the guy." And he kept pointing, his tiny finger fixed on a spot in the corner of the room. I can't really explain it, but sometimes I feel things, presences maybe, that aren't visible. Right then, I felt something there too, but I tried hard not to make a big deal out of it. I didn't want to scare him or make him think he was imagining things, but at the same time, I was afraid to acknowledge it too much. I didn't want to feed into it and risk inviting more of these experiences into our lives. You see, growing up, my family never took this seriously. Whenever I mentioned something strange, they'd laugh or make fun of me. It was isolating. But then, in high school, things changed. I was telling them about something I'd experienced, and their laughter faded. I noticed their body language shift. They were starting to have experiences of their own. When I asked them about it, they admitted they were scared to tell me because they thought I was too fixated on it and might make things worse. That moment stuck with me. Now, let me tell you about some other strange things happening in our home. We've been living in this house for a while. It was newly built when we moved in. Not long after, development started up the road, and I heard there was a small, old cemetery near where they were building. Plus, we have another family cemetery not far away on the main road. After the construction began, weird things started happening around the house. Like stuff just falling off tables, sometimes from just a few feet away. One night, I went to check on the baby, and I saw his hanging toy swinging gently, even though there was no breeze. In the mirror of his play area, I caught a glimpse of a reflection, but he wasn't in the crib. I turned around and saw him sitting quietly in his little chair where my husband had put him earlier. It was a simple moment, but the stillness and that moving toy felt eerie. I mentioned a dream I had to my husband, and it turns out he had a similar one around the same time. I dreamed something with sharp fangs and claws was running down our hallway toward me. I can't remember much else about it except those glowing eyes. Just before it attacked, I woke up. My husband's dream was about some animal attacking him down that same hallway, but he didn't wake up before it got him. It was unsettling to realize we had dreams that paralleled each other so closely. I do have sleep paralysis from time to time, though it's been better lately, knock on wood, but these dreams felt different, more intense. I looked online and found out there are 3 graves near the construction site, and although the developers left a small cluster of trees to mark the area, it's still unnerving to know it's so close. After all this, we lost our senior dog, and sometimes I catch out of the corner of my eye shadows or hear sounds that remind me of him, so I don't think those are connected to the other things going on. The baby sometimes stares and laughs at spots where there's nothing, and I keep telling myself that's just a normal baby thing. But maybe it's not. I'm honestly too scared to talk about this stuff when we're at home, and I haven't dared to bring it up on any apps or forums. It's been quiet for a few days now, which is a relief, but I'm left wondering if all of this is connected to the construction. The timing just seems too perfect to be a coincidence. So here I am, sharing this with you, hoping that maybe you'll understand what it's like when your kids start seeing things you can't fully explain, when your home feels alive with whispers from another world, and when you're caught between fear and the desire to protect your family from what might be lurking just beyond sight. Hey, I want to share something really strange and honestly, pretty unsettling that's been happening at our place this winter. So it's been bitterly cold for a while now, well below freezing every night. Because of that, We stopped letting our cat Whisker out. She's our mouser, the one who usually prowls around outside, but it just seemed too harsh on her this season. But here's the thing, whatever this is, it seems to have caught on to her routine, like it knows she usually comes in at night, and now it just won't give us a moment's peace. When we first got back home from college for winter break, I honestly thought my roommate's dad, Mr. Harlan, was pulling some prank on us. But no, he was serious. He even went outside himself to check out the noises we kept hearing. If you've ever dealt with stray cats or animals that need help, you know they usually stick close by when someone's around, right? But this thing? It's different. It kept darting around the side of our house as Mr. Harlan went outside, meowing low and long, but it was this eerie, drawn-out sound that didn't sound like any normal cat I've ever heard. It led him toward the old goat pen near the wood line at the edge of our property. But here's the kicker. Even though it set off the motion lights around the house, he never got a glimpse of it. It was like it vanished into thin air. I hadn't heard or seen anything myself until tonight, which is why I'm writing this now. My room has 2 big windows, and I usually keep the blinds cracked just a bit so my plants can get some sunlight during the day. I was sitting at my desk, trying to prep for the upcoming semester, and I had my swivel chair turned away from the window so I could focus on my laptop screen. I was playing a video in the background to keep some noise going while I worked. Then, in the quiet moments between the video's dialogue, I heard it, a meowing sound. But it wasn't normal. It was low, kind of distorted, almost unnatural, and it sent a chill right down my spine. My window is about 9 feet off the ground because we live on a hill, so this thing had to be perched right up against the glass or something, because the sound seemed to come from just behind me. I didn't dare look. Honestly, I just cleared my whole room in 2 giant leaps. It felt like whatever it was right there. So close, I could almost feel its breath on the glass. Just after that, my roommate came out of her room looking pretty shaken. She said she heard something whimpering outside her window, kind of like a dog that's upset it's not getting what it wants from its owner. It was this desperate, pitiful sound that made her really uneasy. Right now, she's gathering up eggshells and railroad spikes, some kind of makeshift wards, I guess, to put near the windows. And her dad said he's going to dig out his trail camera when the sun comes up in the morning, hoping it might catch what's been lurking around. Honestly, we're grasping at straws here. We've looked everywhere online and asked around, but all the advice we get is basically, don't go outside, or you're on your own. It's frustrating not knowing what we're dealing with, and if there's any normal explanation, I'd like to hear it because we're stuck waiting for that trail cam footage to know for sure. Oh, and there's an update. Apparently there's been a cougar sighting in the area recently. I called the Wildlife Resources line just to check, and the person I spoke with said the cougar has been spotted creeping closer to residential zones, even near some public areas this afternoon. They're actively searching for it right now. So maybe this is what's been making those strange sounds and moving around our house. We've made sure all our animals are safely locked up now, and we've told the neighbors down the road so they could bring their horses in. If it is the cougar, I really hope they manage to capture it safely and relocate it without any trouble. For now, my roommate has placed wards near the windows, trying to keep that sense of safety, and honestly, she's been way more scared about all this than I have. I guess the unknown just gets under your skin. Anyway, I'm hoping this is the last update I have to share. Fingers crossed that with the trail cam and the wildlife folks on it, we'll find some answers soon. Hey, I want to share some stories with you. 2 different but chilling accounts about things that linger just beyond the edge of our everyday lives. They're personal and, honestly, a little scary, but I hope telling them helps me, and maybe you, make sense of these strange experiences. First, let me tell you about my neighbor, someone, I think a shapeshifter, something like a skinwalker. It started when I was a kid, around 7 years old. I remember one evening I wandered into the kitchen and glanced out the back door. There, just lying down like a dog, was this creature staring right back at me. But its eyes, they were different. One glowed with a fierce yellow light, and the other was a deep, eerie green. Our eyes met, and I froze. I called out to my family in the living room, "Something's outside!" But when they went to check, it had vanished like a shadow melting into the night. Years passed, but the encounters didn't stop. Another time, when I was going out to get firewood for the stove, I opened the door and, instantly, something darted in front of me so fast I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was gone before I could even make sense of it. My sister has had unsettling moments too. She was taking our dog out to the old woodshed, an abandoned place we don't use anymore, when she stopped dead in her tracks. She said, "It looked right at me." Imagine her fear, standing there with the dog, the woodshed silent but heavy with an unseen presence. I once took the dog to that same spot. As I turned around, a large bush nearby began shaking violently, as if something huge was lurking just behind it. My heart pounded, and I hurriedly pulled the dog back toward the safety of the house. Even my grandmother had her share of eerie experiences. She used to sit in her car in the driveway, sipping a beer and watching the woods. But one evening, something sprinted across in front of her car, and she found herself unable to drive away. She called us to come escort her inside, shaken to her core. That was the last time she did her quiet vigil in the car. And there's more. When I was 7, I woke up to a whisper calling my name from the back porch. The same place I'd seen that dog-like creature lying down. I ran crying to my older sister, terrified. It happened again when I was about 10, the voice soft but unmistakable. Speaking of my sister, there was a day she was walking home through tall, wild grass with a friend. They heard rustling nearby and, suddenly, something charged at them full sprint. They didn't stop running until they were safely inside the house. For a while, things calmed down. But just a few weeks ago, I was on a call with someone, and for some reason, I started screaming playfully. Then, my sister and I heard a scream back. We looked at each other in shock and hurried inside. We live deep in the woods, far from neighbors, so that sound chilled me to the bone. There's a local story in the Appalachian area. People call it a skinwalker, and my dad and his friend think they might have seen one. They were hunting when a deer dashed and hid behind a tree, peeking nervously. Then, a smaller, strange figure darted away. My dad's friend even took pictures of its footprints, but I've never been able to get hold of them. The spot wasn't our property, but close enough. One of my biggest fears is that one day, one of our dogs will come back from outside, but it won't be our dog. That's when I'm really scared it might get inside. Now I want to tell you about someone else's story. My friend, who's been feeling like she's watched her whole life. She's 25, and she's had this uneasy feeling since she was little. Like someone or something is always just beyond her sight, watching but never hurting. It's protective, she says, but still, it's unnerving. She talked to her mom about it, but her mom brushed it off for years. That changed one night over dinner when my friend told her how her little boy, just 2 years old, was pointing to the corners of the house, scared, saying there was a ghost there. Her mom's face went pale and she said, "You need to get the baby baptized." Confused, my friend asked why, and her mom explained it was to protect him from bad spirits. Then, her mom shared something that explained a lot. When my friend was around 8 or 9, she and her best friend were staying over at her house. They were playing with a Ouija board in her friend's room. Her mom found them and was horrified. She took my friend away and tried to cleanse her of whatever had been opened by that board. Suddenly, all those strange things from her childhood made sense. The footsteps in the basement at night when she was doing laundry, hearing her name called in that old green house, things moving on their own. the doorknob shaking violently in the middle of the night, as if someone was trying to get in when no one was there. She even remembers teasing her manager at work, telling him to trip, and then he fell face first. Too real to be coincidence. She's not crazy or paranoid. She knows what she's heard and seen. She feels watched, and it's a weight she carries every day. Both stories, though different, share this thread of unseen watchers, strange movements, and a world just out of reach. They remind me that sometimes the shadows hold more than just darkness. They hold stories and fears we can barely understand. Thanks for listening. I hope these stories stay with you, but not in a way that keeps you awake at night, just as a reminder that there are mysteries in the world, and sometimes it's okay to feel a little scared. Hey, I want to share a story with you, something that happened to me many years ago. It's a bit strange and honestly kind of hard to explain clearly, but I'll do my best to take you through it, step by step. So bear with me. It's one of those memories that still gives me chills. It was late at night, way before smartphones or mobile internet were a thing. I was out with a friend of mine. Let's call him Mark. Mark was openly gay and had a boyfriend, but for some reason, he agreed to be my chaperone at this event my dad was hosting. We were just winding down the night. It must have been around midnight when we said our goodbyes. As we parted, Mark suddenly said, "Oh, my boyfriend wants you to message him when you get home." Now, this was odd because back then, we didn't have instant messaging apps or anything like that. So when I got home, I connected to the internet and sent a message to Mark's boyfriend. Let's call him Carl. I'd only ever talked to Carl online. We'd never met in person. I typed out, "Hey, Mark told me you wanted to talk to me." And Carl replied, "Yeah, I actually dreamed about you last night." He then began to describe this dream, and it was so vivid, so detailed, that it felt almost real. I'll try to tell you what he said, but some parts have faded in my memory over the years. He said, "It was a sunny afternoon, and I was at a well-known park in our city. There I met a child, a little boy who looked lost. He was wearing old, worn-out clothes. The strange thing was, he took my finger and just started walking with me, leading me somewhere. Even as he described it, I remember feeling a knot in my stomach because I was going through this rebellious phase, and I only wore black clothes. But that night, because of the event, I was wearing a red sweater, something I never did. And Carl was describing this kid in the dream, leading him to a house where there was a red sweater hanging outside, drying in the sun. He went on, "We went inside the house, and the kid started showing me around. We came to a room that was odd. It felt like the walls were made of mirrors. At that moment, I froze. The room he was describing was just like my parents' bedroom, which had these huge wardrobes with mirrored doors. Carl had never been to my house, and yet he was describing it perfectly. The air felt thick, heavier, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken. Then he said, "We went to another room where the windows were really close to the floor, almost touching the bed." That was another detail that sent shivers down my spine. The windows in my parents' house weren't exactly like that, but my bed was very tall and practically level with the windowsill, just a few inches apart. It was eerie how Carl's dream mirrored my actual house so closely. Then the dream took an even stranger turn. Carl said the child told him, "This is my house. I live here. I love your family, but I love you especially because you play with me every night." That's when Carl told me the kid's name. I won't say it out loud even now because every time I did, strange things happened. The room would suddenly feel heavy, like the air was thick with something unseen. The name he said was the same as an online character I used to play with every night, a character no one but me knew about. Mark had no idea about this game or the character. He knew about my red sweater and the house, but not the game. Carl added, "The kid told me he sits by the window and watches you sleep every night." That was the moment my fear boiled over. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, practically screaming at him. "Did you tell Carl anything about my house? Or what I was wearing?" Mark was confused, saying, "Why would I do that?" I guess back then, it seemed normal to share some things about friends, like if they had a pool or something cool, but not the intimate details of a bedroom or a red sweater. I wanted to believe Mark, but I was terrified. Mark even called Carl and asked him to stop scaring me, but sleep didn't come that night. I was wide awake until the sun rose. Here's another strange detail. Carl swore that the child left a mark on his finger, the same finger the child grabbed in the dream. When Carl and I finally met in person, not long after, he showed me this mark. It was a small, round, dark spot, not black, more like a birthmark. I asked Mark if he'd seen it before when he met Carl, but Mark said no, it was new. Carl insisted it appeared after the dream. Years passed, and we drifted apart for a while. When Carl and I met again a couple of years ago, the mark was gone. It had faded away completely. Carl still remembers the dream vividly, and so do I. To this day, I don't say that kid's name aloud. It feels like saying it calls something forth, something I don't want to invite back. Weird things happened in that house, and I truly believe many of them were connected to that spirit, or whatever it was. I've had other encounters with it, strange experiences that I'll share another time since it's getting late now. But I wanted to tell you this story because it stuck with me, and I think it belongs here. Thanks for listening. So this is going to sound a little strange, but I've recently started collecting vintage porcelain dolls. Most of them are old Pierrot clowns, though I've also found a few unusual antique dolls at estate sales and small auctions. Some have real human hair, hand-painted faces, and clothing that looks like it belongs to another century. But there's one doll in particular, a masked porcelain figure I've started calling Marielle, who feels completely different from the others. The first time I held her, I felt this strange, familiar sadness. It wasn't frightening. It was more like remembering someone I had loved a long time ago, even though I knew we had never met. Whenever she's nearby, I feel like smiling and crying at the same time. She carries a kind of emotional weight, but somehow that weight feels comforting. And ever since I brought her home, something unusual has been happening. I have a long history with domestic violence. I grew up in homes where anger and fear were part of everyday life, and later, without meaning to, I repeatedly found myself in relationships with people who had serious aggression problems. For a long time, I wondered why I kept falling into the same pattern. But since Marielle came into my life, that pattern seems to be breaking. I haven't consciously changed the way I date. I haven't started asking different questions or behaving differently. Still, people with volatile or controlling personalities seem to remove themselves from my life almost immediately. A date might go perfectly well at first. We'll talk, laugh, and discover that we have similar interests. Most of these women aren't bothered by unusual collections. Some of them enjoy taxidermy, preserved specimens, antique medical objects, and other curiosities. Everything feels normal until they come to my house and see Marielle. Then something changes. Their faces lose color. Their breathing becomes shallow. And without any warning, they begin confessing things. They'll suddenly tell me about violent arguments, jealous behavior, cruel things they've done to former partners, or thoughts they've never shared with anyone else. It's almost as though standing in front of the doll makes it impossible for them to hide anything. Several have said my home suddenly feels like a forgotten childhood memory. 2 women experienced full panic attacks after looking at her. One of them, who later admitted she had once attacked a former partner, began clutching her throat. She said she couldn't breathe and felt as though invisible hands were pressing against her neck. But that's the part I don't understand. Marielle has never made me feel afraid. Around her, I feel protected. Sometimes I'll sit with her in my lap, and there's this gentle, bittersweet feeling in the room. It feels almost like someone is softly playing with my hair or rubbing my back after a difficult day. She seems lonely to me. I know that probably sounds ridiculous because she's an object, but sometimes I get the sense that she simply wants to be treated kindly. I keep her near a few of my most treasured possessions. I check on her occasionally, straighten her dress, and make sure she's comfortable, though most of the time I leave her alone. I know almost nothing about her history. I bought her from an old toy dealer that appeared to be closing down. She was listed as coming from southern Louisiana, but her design is unusual. Her face is covered by a porcelain mask, and instead of ordinary hands, she has two smaller masks attached to her wrists. From what little I've been able to find, that style may have connections to folk traditions from Mexico or Cuba, but I haven't found another doll exactly like her. Several women have begged me to get rid of her. Some have told me to throw her away. Others have insisted that I burn her. But I can't bring myself to do that. Whatever other people feel when they look at her, I feel safe. Safer than I have felt in years. Maybe she isn't causing anything supernatural. Maybe people simply react to her appearance, and the rest is coincidence. I understand that possibility. Still, I can't ignore the pattern. Why does everyone accept the other dolls, specimens, and strange objects in my home, but react so strongly to this one? And why does the doll that terrifies them feel so gentle to me? I don't know what Marielle is carrying with her. All I know is that since she arrived, dangerous people seem to reveal themselves before they can become part of my life. And for the first time, I'm beginning to wonder whether something that looks haunted might actually be trying to keep me safe. Let me start by clearing something up. I've never used drugs, and there's no known history of serious mental illness in my family. I was almost 13 when this happened, so I was young, but not so young that I couldn't tell the difference between a dream and something happening right in front of me. I remember waking up in the middle of the night because it felt like someone was slowly pulling the blanket away from my body. At first, I thought it had simply slipped, so I grabbed it and pulled it back over myself. Then it was ripped away again. Hard. I had been sleeping on my stomach, and I quickly rolled over. Just as I started to push myself upright, I saw two figures directly across from me. They weren't standing beside the wall. They looked like they were somehow attached to it. The moment I noticed them, my whole body became heavy. A second earlier, I had rolled over without any trouble, but now I could barely move. I tried to call out, but nothing came from my throat. At the same time, a sharp, high-pitched sound filled my head. The figures simply watched me. They seemed to be communicating with each other, although I never heard any voices. There was a faint flickering between them, almost like television static or light passing through fog. Neither of them came closer. They didn't need to. I was completely terrified. I don't know how long it lasted. It may have been less than a minute, but it felt endless. Eventually, I managed to pull the blanket over my head. I stayed underneath it, perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement would make them come toward me. Running wasn't an option. I would have had to pass directly in front of them. So I stayed hidden until exhaustion finally took over and I fell asleep. The details are what still trouble me. The house was newly built, and my family was the first to live there. There wasn't some old history attached to the place, at least not that we knew of. The two figures were identical. I could only see them from the waist up, and they were completely flat, almost like glowing images projected onto the wall. They were pale white with a faint blue tint around them. Their faces had no clear features, except for deep, dark spaces where their eyes should have been. They looked less like people and more like expressionless masks. And while I was looking at them, I felt something beyond fear. It was a very clear feeling that I had witnessed something I was never supposed to see. For years, I kept the experience to myself. I thought about it often, but I rarely spoke about it. Eventually, my family moved away, and life carried on. Then, many years later, my sister and I were visiting our father. Somehow, the conversation turned to the strange things that had happened in that house. She began telling me about things she remembered seeing. Finally, I told her about the night in my bedroom. Before I could finish describing the figures, she started filling in the details herself. She said they were only visible from the waist up. She said they were flat against the wall. She even remembered the pale glow and the dark, empty-looking eyes. Those details were so unusual that I had never heard anything similar in ordinary ghost stories or paranormal accounts. My sister said she had carried the memory with her for years, too. We couldn't determine whether we had seen them on the same night, but whatever happened, it seems we both witnessed the same thing. I've spent years trying to explain it logically. Sleep paralysis, a vivid dream, shadows, reflections, childhood imagination. I've considered every explanation I could think of. But the blanket being pulled, the strange sound, the identical figures, and my sister remembering those same specific details have always made it difficult to dismiss. To this day, I still don't know what was on that wall. And honestly, part of me isn't sure I want to know. Hi everyone. I wanted to share something that happened to my younger sister after she moved to a quiet town in rural Japan for a new teaching job. She had spent several days in Osaka for orientation before traveling to the old house arranged for her placement. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was small and worn with age, but she was excited to settle in and begin this new chapter of her life. On her first night there, she was completely exhausted, so she went to bed early. Sometime during the night, she suddenly felt as though someone was standing close beside her. Then, she began hearing muffled whispers in Japanese. She speaks Japanese fairly well, but she couldn't understand any of the words. Without warning, she started crying uncontrollably. Along with the tears came an overwhelming wave of sadness and painful thoughts that didn't feel like her own. She described seeing fragments of a life, almost like memories belonging to someone who had spent years desperately trying to be loved, yet always felt unwanted. After that, she couldn't sleep. She called me the following night. It was afternoon where I live, but it was already close to midnight for her. Her voice was shaking as she told me she could still feel a man's presence moving through the house. She was terrified and exhausted, but she kept saying that she didn't believe the presence was cruel or evil. "He just feels tired," she told me, "and incredibly sad." She admitted that she hadn't called me immediately because she was afraid I would judge her or tell her she had imagined everything. That surprised me because, growing up, I was usually the one who experienced strange things. I sometimes saw figures or felt unsettling presences in places no one else seemed to notice. My sister had only experienced something like that once before, when we were children, and I had seen it too. Eventually, she became frightened enough to contact the woman responsible for her placement. Thankfully, the woman listened without laughing or dismissing her. She promised to arrange for a Shinto priest to visit the house and perform a purification ritual. While we were on the phone, I asked my sister to put me on speaker. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to communicate with anything. I mainly wanted my sister to feel supported and less alone. Still, I began speaking calmly to the presence in the house. I said, "We understand that you're hurting. We understand that you may feel trapped or unable to move on, but please be patient with her. She has only just arrived, and this transition is already difficult for her. She isn't trying to disturb you. She's doing everything she can to find someone who might help you." As I spoke, my sister suddenly began sobbing. She kept answering, "Hi, hi," which means yes in Japanese. At first, I assumed she was simply agreeing with me. Then she stopped abruptly and sounded confused. "Why am I saying that?" she asked. "Why do I keep answering you?" At that exact moment, chills spread down both of my arms and into my legs. I've had chills before, of course, but never like that. My chest also became incredibly heavy, and I was overwhelmed by a feeling that seemed almost like an apology. The clearest thought in my mind was, "I'm sorry for burdening you." Then I began hearing faint sounds through the phone. They were so quiet that I couldn't tell whether they were whispers, movement in the room, or just interference on the call. I repeated what I had already said. I told the presence that we weren't angry, but that my sister needed peace and sleep. I asked it to give her space until the priest arrived. A friend called her soon afterward, so we ended our conversation. She called me again while I was driving to work. She said she had considered calling our mother, but our mother is deeply religious, and my sister was afraid the conversation would become frightening or judgmental rather than comforting. Later, I spoke with our father. My sister hadn't told him yet, probably because she thought he wouldn't believe her. Instead, he took the situation seriously. He said that if things became unbearable, we could look into breaking the lease and moving her somewhere else. The problem is that she lives in a very small town. Housing is limited, and most of the available homes are old. Even if she moved, there would be no guarantee that the next place would feel any safer. There is another part of this that she doesn't know yet. Our family was recently told that our grandfather may only have another week or two left. Thankfully, my sister was able to return to our home country and say goodbye to him before his health declined further. I don't know whether the timing is connected in any way, but it has made everything feel heavier. I suppose I'm sharing this because I needed somewhere to put all of these thoughts. More than anything, though, I want to help my sister feel safe in her new home. The Shinto priest will hopefully visit soon, but until then, I keep wondering what else we can do. How do we comfort her without feeding her fear? And if there truly is a tired, grieving presence in that house, how do we help it leave peacefully? Thank you for listening. Hi everyone. I wanted to share something that happened to my younger sister after she moved to a quiet town in rural Japan for a new teaching job. She had spent several days in Osaka for orientation before traveling to the old house arranged for her placement. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was small and worn with age, but she was excited to settle in and begin this new chapter of her life. On her first night there, she was completely exhausted, so she went to bed early. Sometime during the night, she suddenly felt as though someone was standing close beside her. Then she began hearing muffled whispers in Japanese. She speaks Japanese fairly well, but she couldn't understand any of the words. Without warning, she started crying uncontrollably. Along with the tears came an overwhelming wave of sadness and painful thoughts that didn't feel like her own. She described seeing fragments of a life, almost like memories belonging to someone who had spent years desperately trying to be loved, yet always felt unwanted. After that, she couldn't sleep. She called me the following night. It was afternoon where I live, but it was already close to midnight for her. Her voice was shaking as she told me she could still feel a man's presence moving through the house. She was terrified and exhausted, but she kept saying that she didn't believe the presence was cruel or evil. "He just feels tired," she told me, "and incredibly sad." She admitted that she hadn't called me immediately because she was afraid I would judge her or tell her she had imagined everything. That surprised me because, growing up, I was usually the one who experienced strange things. I sometimes saw figures or felt unsettling presences in places no one else seemed to notice. My sister had only experienced something like that once before, when we were children, and I had seen it too. Eventually, she became frightened enough to contact the woman responsible for her placement. Thankfully, the woman listened without laughing or dismissing her. She promised to arrange for a Shinto priest to visit the house and perform a purification ritual. While we were on the phone, I asked my sister to put me on speaker. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to communicate with anything. I mainly wanted my sister to feel supported and less alone. Still, I began speaking calmly to the presence in the house. I said, "We understand that you're hurting. We understand that you may feel trapped or unable to move on. But please be patient with her. She has only just arrived, and this transition is already difficult for her. She isn't trying to disturb you. She's doing everything she can to find someone who might help you." As I spoke, my sister suddenly began sobbing. She kept answering, "Hi, hi," which means yes in Japanese. At first, I assumed she was simply agreeing with me. Then she stopped abruptly and sounded confused. "Why am I saying that?" she asked. "Why do I keep answering you?" At that exact moment, chills spread down both of my arms and into my legs. I've had chills before, of course, but never like that. My chest also became incredibly heavy, and I was overwhelmed by a feeling that seemed almost like an apology. The clearest thought in my mind was, "I'm sorry for burdening you." Then I began hearing faint sounds through the phone. They were so quiet that I couldn't tell whether they were whispers, movement in the room, or just interference on the call. I repeated what I had already said. I told the presence that we weren't angry, but that my sister needed peace and sleep. I asked it to give her space until the priest arrived. A friend called her soon afterward, so we ended our conversation. She called me again while I was driving to work. She said she had considered calling our mother, but our mother is deeply religious, and my sister was afraid the conversation would become frightening or judgmental rather than comforting. Later, I spoke with our father. My sister hadn't told him yet, probably because she thought he wouldn't believe her. Instead, he took the situation seriously. He said that if things became unbearable, we could look into breaking the lease and moving her somewhere else. The problem is that she lives in a very small town. Housing is limited, and most of the available homes are old. Even if she moved, there would be no guarantee that the next place would feel any safer. There is another part of this that she doesn't know yet. Our family was recently told that our grandfather may only have another week or two left. Thankfully, my sister was able to return to our home country and say goodbye to him before his health declined further. I don't know whether the timing is connected in any way, but it has made everything feel heavier. I suppose I'm sharing this because I needed somewhere to put all of these thoughts. More than anything, though, I want to help my sister feel safe in her new home. The Shinto priest will hopefully visit soon, but until then, I keep wondering what else we can do. How do we comfort her without feeding her fear? And if there truly is a tired, grieving presence in that house, how do we help it leave peacefully? Thank you for listening. I want to start with a little bit of backstory because I think it matters. When I was 15, my parents went away on vacation, so it was just me and my older brother at home. He was around 20 at the time. We lived in a pretty big 2-story house back then, and my grandparents, along with my aunt and uncle, lived right next door. My mom has always been a spiritual practitioner. She has been involved in that world for as long as I can remember, and I grew up around it. I would not say I knew everything, but I was spiritual too, and I had learned a few things from her over the years. While my parents were gone, my brother decided to have a small house party. It was not anything huge, just a few close friends. I invited my best friend at the time, too. I will call her Lila. Lila was tall, thin, and very spiritual, but not in the same way my mom was. She was involved in darker things, and she once told me she had made some kind of deal with something she called the devil. She said she wanted out of it because it scared her, but honestly, I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. That night, we drank a little, vodka mixed with energy drinks mostly. We also had a jacuzzi, so we sat in there for a while, and the heat made the alcohol hit much harder than I expected. Later that night, we had a sleepover. I remember feeling so drunk and sick that I thought I was going to throw up. I have always had a fear of vomiting, so I started praying quietly, just asking God to help me through it. The next morning, I woke up hungover. Headache, nausea, the whole thing. At first, I thought it was just from the drinking and the jacuzzi, but after a few days, the sick feeling still had not gone away. Then one night, I was lying in bed and I had this uneasy feeling in my room. It was not just normal anxiety. It felt like something was off. I remembered something my mom had always told me. She used to say, "If you ever feel like something is not right, ask if someone is there." So I did. I was lying flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, and the nausea came over me again. I said, "If there is something in here that does not belong here, show yourself." I said it hoping nothing would happen. But something did. All of a sudden, the room felt like it shifted. Then this heavy pressure came down on my chest, pushing me into the mattress. It felt like something was sitting on me. I could not breathe. I genuinely could not get air in. The nausea got worse, and I started seeing black spots in my vision. I was terrified. Then, just as quickly as it came, it disappeared. The pressure was gone. The nausea was gone. The room felt still again. The next day, I called my mom and told her everything. She told me to cleanse my room with sage while praying, so that is exactly what I did. My room was on the side of the house where the wind usually came through, so I opened the window and expected the smoke to clear out easily. After I saged the room, I left for a while and went to a friend's place so it could air out. But when I came back, the room was still full of smoke. That was not normal. So I cleansed it again. Then I did it a third time. I prayed each time, asking for anything dark or unwanted to leave. By around 10 that night, after nearly the whole day had passed, the smoke was finally gone. That night was the first time in days that I lay in bed without nausea, without fear, and without that heavy feeling in the room. I knew something had been there, something dark, something that did not belong. After that, I slowly cut contact with Lila, especially after she told me that whatever she had made that deal with was still following her everywhere. I truly believe she brought something with her that night without meaning to. I think we were both drunk, unguarded, and somehow something attached itself to my room. That was my first real experience with something I can only describe as dark and evil. I still think about it sometimes, because once you feel something like that, you do not really forget it. I'm still pretty shaken up, honestly. This happened about an hour ago, and I keep replaying it in my head because it felt way too real to just brush off as a dream. It started with me sitting on the curb across the street from my neighbor's place. There were 3 women outside, just talking and hanging around together. One of them kept looking over at me. Not in a strange way, more like she was curious about me. I got this feeling that maybe she liked me. And the weird part is, I felt the same pull toward her. But I couldn't get myself to stand up, walk over, and say anything. Then, out of nowhere, this guy showed up. I got the feeling he was her ex. He started yelling at her, getting louder and more aggressive, and the whole mood changed instantly. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I could feel the anger in it. I decided to head back to my house. I was almost at the door when I noticed the woman walking toward me. Behind her, the guy was still shouting, and his voice was getting louder, even though the words were still completely impossible to make out. Then the maintenance guy who had been working around my house turned to me and said very clearly, "Are you ready to make a lot of money?" I remember looking at him and asking, "What do you mean?" He started walking toward the backyard, and I followed him. And right when we got back there, the dream just stopped. But I didn't wake up normally. It was more like I became halfway aware. My body felt awake, but my mind was still caught somewhere else. Then this deep, almost demonic brass melody started playing in my head, mixed with harsh static. It was loud, not background noise loud, but inside my skull loud. And suddenly I had this awful feeling that something was behind me. I opened my eyes and turned around in a panic. There was nothing there, just my room, quiet and ordinary, which somehow made it worse. So I rolled back over and closed my eyes again. Within seconds, the same melody came back. That same deep brass sound, that same static, and that same horrible feeling that something was right behind me. I opened my eyes immediately, and the music stopped. Then I tried closing my eyes one more time, and this time, it wasn't even music anymore. It was just deafening static and ringing. I sat straight up, fully awake, but the sound kept going. It was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. It lasted for about a minute after I was already sitting up. And now, an hour later, my ears are still ringing. The part that scares me most is that I've been trying to become a musician for the past year. I've been learning how to sing, play piano, and produce tracks in FL Studio. But that melody I heard, I don't think I could have made it up on my own. It was honestly catchy, almost like something that could become a real song, but it had such a dark, evil feeling to it. It sounded like a whole brass orchestra had been shoved into my head. I do believe there are people who sell their soul for fame or fortune, and I know that might sound intense, but that's where my mind went. The maintenance guy asking if I was ready to make a lot of money, then that melody hitting me right after. It felt like some kind of offer, or a lure, like something was trying to reach me through the one thing I've been chasing. I should also mention that I've had sleep paralysis 3 times before. Once, I saw a woman-like figure crouched or perched on my windowsill. So I know what sleep paralysis feels like. But this didn't feel like that. I could move. I knew I was awake. I sat up and the static was still there. That's why I'm scared. Because I don't know if this was a dream at all. I still don't know exactly what we heard out there. Even now, years later, I can't sit here and tell you with absolute certainty what it was. I'm not trying to convince anyone. That's not really the point. I just want to tell this story as honestly as I can, because it's the only experience in my life that ever made me question what I thought I believed. I've always been pretty skeptical about things like ghosts, Bigfoot, all of that. I'm not someone who jumps straight to the paranormal. But this camping trip has stayed with me in a way nothing else has. This happened in late August of 2019, up in the Cascades of central Washington, not too far from Glacier Peak. My family had camped around that area before, so we weren't exactly strangers to the woods. It was my dad, my mom, my younger brother, and me at first. The campsite itself was pretty remote. It took about an hour and a half to get back to the nearest town, and once you were out there, you really felt out there. Years later, my family and I actually went back to see the place again, but the road was basically destroyed. Trees were down everywhere, sections had washed out, and we had to bike in for miles just to get close. Seeing it like that made the whole memory feel even stranger. But even on that original trip, something felt wrong from the beginning. The best way I can describe it is that the whole campsite felt sealed off. There was almost no wind, no birds, no usual forest sounds. It was like the woods had been muted. You know how a forest usually feels alive, even when it's quiet? This wasn't like that. It felt still in a way that made you notice it. For the first couple of days, though, nothing really happened. We tried to ignore the odd feeling and just enjoy the trip. Then more family showed up near the end. My uncle, my aunt, and my 2 cousins came out to join us. My cousins were younger and full of energy, way more chaotic than my brother and me. They were running around, yelling, smacking sticks against trees, doing all the usual kid stuff. And honestly, I joined in too. The next morning, my uncle mentioned that he'd heard movement around his tent during the night. At the time, we all brushed it off. It could have been an animal. In fact, that's probably what any reasonable person would assume. A day or 2 later, my uncle's family packed up and left. After that, it was just the 4 of us again. The campground had emptied out too, which made the silence feel even bigger. That evening, the bugs got awful. Mosquitoes and little gnats were everywhere, and bug spray wasn't doing much. My mom decided to fog the campsite, so the rest of us spread out while she dealt with it. There were several fire pits and benches scattered around the area. I went to the nearest bench, maybe 70 feet from our camp. My parents and my brother went farther off to another fire pit, maybe 150 feet away from me. I sat there looking down at my phone, just passing time. Then I heard something right behind my head. It was this low, harsh, human-like snarl. Not a growl exactly. Not an animal sound I recognized. It lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and it was close. I still can't say whether it was inches away or a few feet away, but it was close enough that every part of me knew it was directly behind me. At first, I honestly thought someone was messing with me. It sounded almost like someone trying to do a creepy zombie impression. But when I looked up, there was no one there, no one behind me, no one beside me, no one walking away. The only people I could see were my family, gathered by the other fire pit. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I don't remember thinking clearly. I don't remember deciding what to do. I just remember running toward my family, crying and completely shaken. My mom later said I yelled for her right away, but I barely remember that part. After that, the noises started. At first, they were distant knocks, tree knocks, I guess. They came from somewhere outside the campsite, far enough away that they didn't feel close, but clear enough that we all heard them. Sometimes they seemed random. Sometimes there was almost a pattern to them. One would come from in front of us, then later another from off to the side. They weren't constant at first, maybe every 15 or 20 minutes. My brother started knocking back with sticks, and for some reason, I joined him. At that point, I still hadn't connected the snarl behind me with the sounds in the woods. We thought it was strange, but also kind of exciting in that reckless way kids can be. We had been making noise all day and had gotten no response before. My parents didn't like it. They told us to stop. Then the sounds changed. The knocks turned into whoops and calls. They were louder than the knocking, and they seemed to come from different places around the campsite. Not all at once, but enough that it felt like something was moving around us. Sometimes the calls had this strange, repeating quality, almost like one sound was being answered by another. I don't know how long that went on. Time felt strange by then. But eventually my parents decided we were leaving. Not in the morning, not after dinner, right then. They started packing everything into the car as fast as they could. I sat on one of the benches while they moved back and forth through the campsite, loading gear. By then the sun had just gone down and the forest was getting dark. I was terrified, so I kept scanning the trees over and over. After a few minutes, I noticed something. partly wrapped around a tree. It didn't look right. It didn't blend into the woods the way everything else did. It was too dark to see clearly, but it stood out enough that my eyes kept locking onto it. I took a picture with my phone, but it was cheap and the light was terrible, so the image wasn't great. Still, when we looked at it later, there was definitely something there, or at least something that didn't look like the rest of the forest. We left that night, and I think that's the part that makes this so hard for me to dismiss. It wasn't just one weird sound. It wasn't just one person getting spooked. My whole family heard the knocks and the calls. My parents were disturbed enough to cut the tour short and get us out of there. Could it have been an animal? Maybe. Could it have been a person messing with us? I guess that's possible too, but I don't understand how someone could have made that sound right behind my head and disappeared without me seeing them. And I don't understand why it all seemed to react to the noise we had been making. We've gone back to that area a few times since then. Only once did we hear anything like tree knocks again. I still don't claim to know what it was, but whatever happened out there, my family remembers it. And none of us talk about that trip like it was just another camping story. I guess I'll just tell this the way I remember it, because honestly, none of these things are huge on their own. They're not movie-level hauntings or anything dramatic like that. But when I put them all together, they've always made me wonder what was really going on. The first thing I remember happened when I was really little, probably around 5. It was just me, my mom, and my baby sister at home. I had these little figures I used to play with. Some were newer princess ones, but a few were older wooden figures, carved and painted, the kind that felt like they belonged to another time. There was one figure in particular, a little bride, and I remember leaving her on the near side of my bedroom table, close to where I'd been sitting. I went out to grab a tissue, and when I came back, she was on the far side of the table, almost hanging off the edge. Not just moved a little, she was barely balanced there. I know people might say I remembered it wrong because I was young, and that's fair. But I remember being scared. I remember the feeling of seeing it there and knowing I hadn't left it like that. Another thing is that I've seen shadows for years, not only in the corner of my eye and not only when it's dark. Sometimes I'll be looking straight at something and see a figure standing partly behind it. Then when I look again, it's gone. The ones in the corner of my eye somehow feel more solid though, more present. One time at school, I was sitting in a classroom during lunch with a few friends. There was a door beside us that led into another room, and it slowly opened by itself. We ignored it at first, but eventually I got up and shut it. Then it opened again. There was nobody in the room next door, so we just left it alone. But later, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing in the middle of that room. They were perfectly lined up between the open door near us and another open doorway across from it. I turned to look properly, and there was no one there. I've also heard voices in my house a couple of times. The first time I was downstairs by myself. My younger sister was upstairs, either asleep or on her tablet, and the house was quiet. Then I heard a woman's voice come from the kitchen and say, "Hello?" It wasn't a voice I recognized, and it sounded too clear to be from outside. I didn't investigate. I just ran upstairs because apparently my survival instincts are very simple and very fast. The second time happened more recently. I was home alone, and there was this irritating little noise that kept bothering me. I was feeding the dog, and half-jokingly I said, "Shut up," toward whatever the noise was. As I turned to walk away, I heard something whisper back, almost sharply, "Shut up." I tried to convince myself I hadn't heard it, because sometimes lying to yourself is the only blanket you have nearby. There was another strange moment at school, back when I was in a food tech classroom with an old friend and 2 other people. From where I stood, I could see everyone in the room. I stepped backward and felt myself bump into someone. I turned to apologize, and while I was turning, I could still feel them against me. I could even see a shape at the edge of my vision. But when I looked directly where they should have been, there was nothing there. No person, no object, nothing I could have bumped into except a counter, and whatever I felt had been too tall and too human for that. One memory might have a more normal explanation, because I had just woken from a nightmare. I was about 9 or 10. I woke up upset, turned over, and saw my half-brother Callan smiling at me. But it didn't feel right. It wasn't comforting. It felt wrong enough that I shut my eyes and started crying and screaming. When I opened them again, he was gone. The strange part is that I was on the top bunk, so for him to be at eye level with me, he would have had to be standing on my sister's bedside table. He said the next day that it wasn't him, and he still says that now. I believe him honestly. It was the middle of the night, maybe around 2 in the morning, and he would have been asleep too. I've tried looking it up, but I've never found an explanation that fully fits. Maybe it was sleep-related. Maybe it was my brain still dragging part of the nightmare into the room with me. I don't know, but I remember how it felt. I should also mention that my dreams have always been strange. Either I don't dream at all, or I have dreams where I die, someone I love dies, I'm being hunted, murdered, or someone is trying to kill me. I've also had recurring dreams since childhood, the kind that come back with the same heavy atmosphere, like they never really left. And then there's something my mom told me from when she was young. She grew up in an old house, and her dad built an extension over the place where an old well used to be. I think her parents' bedroom was on the top floor of that extension, and when she was little, she would sometimes sleep in there. But she hated that room. She said when she tried to sleep, she would hide under the covers because she could hear screaming right above her face. I obviously can't prove that happened, but she remembers it clearly. My aunt has also said she once lived in a house with what she believed was poltergeist activity, though I don't know all the details of that. So I'm not saying all of this has to be paranormal. I'm open to normal explanations, genuinely. Maybe some of it is memory, stress, tiredness, sleep stuff, or the brain filling in gaps in strange ways. But I also can't pretend these moments didn't stay with me. They feel small when I say them one by one, but together, they've always made me wonder if there's something I'm missing. Hey there. I want to share with you some stories that have been part of my family's life, moments that blurred the lines between our world and the unknown. So get comfortable and let me take you through these experiences one by one. When I was about 5 years old, there was this strange pattern. I'd wake up every night around the same time, switch on my bedroom light, and then quietly slip into bed with my parents to fall back asleep. It was like clockwork. But one night, something different happened. I woke up as usual, turned on the light, and went to lie down beside my mom and dad. This time, I faced the hallway, where my room's light cast a long beam into the darkness beyond. And then, out of the pure blackness of the living room, a figure emerged. It was tall, roughly 7 feet, and dressed in a white hooded robe. The hands were folded right where the sleeves met, but where its face should have been, there was only an endless black void. It wasn't quite walking, nor gliding. It moved towards me in a way I couldn't quite understand. Now, here's the thing. I didn't feel evil or scared of it, but my little mind knew something was wrong. Something was there that shouldn't be. I freaked out, of course, and woke my parents. My dad jumped up and did something to run off the ghost, as he called it. Looking back, it might have been around the time my grandmother passed away. I always wondered if that was connected. Maybe it was her, reaching out somehow. But who can say for sure? Years later, I overheard a secret conversation between my dad and one of our uncles. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but my dad's voice was loud, and I caught bits and pieces. You see, I used to have nightmares that started when I was in middle school. They were creepy, unsettling dreams that kept me awake and made school tough. My parents tried having me pray every night, hoping it would help, but those nightmares just kept coming. Apparently, according to my dad's story to our uncle, I had a younger brother, a brother from another life, who was clinging to me from the afterlife, wanting to cross over and be with me again. But if he did, it would have been bad for our family. So another uncle, a shaman, spoke with him and convinced him to let go, so I could finally rest at night. When my dad asked if I knew about this, he said it was better if I never found out. Funny thing is, I did find out, but I just pretend I don't. Because if I ask too much, my dad would probably flip out and make a scene. So I keep quiet, still wondering why my ghostly brother couldn't cross over. Then there's my dad's own hunting stories. Oh, those are something else. One time, he was waiting for a buck, probably caught a bit of a nap in his car. Suddenly, he saw this prize-winning buck just a few feet away. Excited, he raised his gun to take a shot, but through the scope, the buck vanished. Lowering the gun, it was back. Raising it again, gone. It was like the buck was playing hide and seek. Eventually, it disappeared for good, leaving everyone puzzled. Was it a spirit? A figment of his imagination? No one knew. Another time, my dad was up in a tree stand, waiting for a buck that was too far to shoot. Then he noticed a woman in a white dress walking just below him. Strange, right? Why would someone be wandering there dressed like that, especially in the cold? He wanted to call out, but something stopped him. She disappeared in the direction of his uncle, who was also hunting nearby. When my dad told his uncle about it, the uncle said he saw no one, and that place was supposed to be empty except for them. That encounter shook them both. My uncle was too scared to go back alone, and soon after, my dad's legs swelled up and hurt for weeks. A shaman uncle suggested they might have disturbed some spirit, so they went back during the day to apologize. After that, the leg got better. It's eerie, isn't it? That's why I avoid the woods at night. You never know what's out there. Not all encounters are out in the woods. At work, strange things happen too. Once I was carrying a tray of drinks, usually no problem, but this time it tipped over and spilled everywhere. I swear I felt a tug on my arm right before it happened. Luckily, my coworkers checked on me and helped clean up, but it left me wondering. Years ago, at my first job working the night shift in an Asian grocery store, I saw something that made my skin crawl. While counting coins at the register, I caught a glimpse of a small boy peeking out from near the soda cooler. When I turned to help, no one was there. Then I saw him again, but when I looked fully, he vanished. A coworker said I probably just saw Halloween decorations, but I'm certain I saw him. Speaking of spirits, my dad had another spooky hunting experience that truly scared him. He was out on private property at a treehouse stand built by a relative, hunting at midnight. The hut was pitch black. The only sounds were the wind and some fluttering pigeons. Suddenly, there was a knock on the hatch. My dad called out, telling whoever it was that he had permission to hunt there, but the knocking stopped. Then footsteps nearby, but when he looked, no one. Later, when he fell asleep in his car, there was another knocking on his window. He woke up to find no one there and checked his phone. Early morning hours, and the relative's house nearby was dark. He went back up to the hut, and the knocking started again, louder this time, shaking the entire hut. He stayed silent, frozen. Eventually it stopped, and he left quickly. He called relatives who practice shamanism, and they said it was a friendly spirit, probably his deceased grandfather, telling him not to hunt alone at night there anymore. Since then, my dad only checks trail cams and hunts during the day. A few days later, a mysterious knocking happened in the bathroom while he was showering. We all heard it, but none of us was near the door. Could it have been Grandpa? We'll never know. Our parents probably won't tell us for fear we'd be too scared. And then there's the mystery of Grandma's missing cash. Years ago, before we moved to our current house, a large sum of money she had hidden disappeared. None of us knew about it, but my dad blamed me and my younger sister. Grandma raised me since my parents were young, and she used to hide my small stash of cash in her sewing closet. One day, my mom called me about the missing money. Grandma's cash was gone, and when my dad searched her closet, he found my hidden portable bank right there. They didn't believe me when I said I didn't know about the money. Grandma even caught my younger sister stealing from my bank, but my dad still blamed me. Hours of interrogation followed, with threats and accusations. In the end, Grandma started blaming her deceased mother and sisters, who had haunted her for years. She yelled at them, demanding they show themselves. My dad still holds this against me, using it as ammo when he's mad. The whole thing remains a mystery, a shadow hanging over our family. So these stories, ghostly figures, restless spirits, mysterious disappearances, and strange happenings are all part of our family's tapestry. They remind me that there's more to this world than meets the eye, and sometimes those we love are never truly gone. Thanks for listening. It means a lot to share these moments with someone who understands the wonder and the fear that comes with them. Hey there. I want to share some stories that have been passed down through my family, especially from my grandma. You see, she often talked about her mother and sisters, who sadly passed away when she was very young. I never got to see any pictures of them, only heard these eerie stories about how their spirits still lingered around her. These tales all connect in a way, and they all take place at this little garden plot my family has owned for years, somewhere in Laos. Let me take you through them one by one. Story 1. The Midnight Garden Plot Haunting. So, one day, Grandma was out at the garden with my uncle, Aunt Mai, Aunt Lynn. Mai's the older one and Lynn is younger. I never met Lynn in person, only saw her in photos and heard her voice over the phone. And my dad. They'd been working the soil all day, plowing the land, getting everything ready for planting. As the sky started to darken, Aunt Mai suggested, "Hey, maybe we should head home. It's getting late." But Grandma, with that stubborn warmth she always had, said no. She told them, "It'll be too late by the time we get home. Let's just stay the night here." So they kept plowing a little longer, then ate dinner together in their small garden hut they'd built when they first bought the land. The evening was calm, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and the faint chirping of crickets. They'd just begun to drift off to sleep when, suddenly, this chilling laughter echoed all around the hut. It wasn't the kind of laugh you'd expect. It was sharp, almost mocking, and it seemed to come from everywhere. Then, scurrying sounds above their heads, like something was climbing over the roof. Now, this isn't the first time Grandma told me about noises like this happening there. Aunt Lynn, who's usually quiet, was trembling and crying, begging to go home. The tension in that little hut must have been so thick you could slice it with a knife. After what felt like forever, the noises stopped. Aunt Mai whispered, "Do you want me to check outside, Grandma?" But Grandma, ever the calm one, said firmly, "No, just go back to sleep. I'll light a small fire near the door, in case someone tries to get in." She lit the fire, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The rest of the night was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. In the morning, they found things scattered around the hut, tools out of place, little marks in the dirt, but Grandma just brushed it off. She had them finish plowing before they finally headed home. Story 2. The Mystery Voices on the Trail. Another day, Grandma and Aunt Mai were back at the garden, finishing up some last bits of plowing. Suddenly, Aunt Mai heard voices, men and women, as if walking toward them on the trail. She stopped and told Grandma. Grandma paused, listening intently, then said quietly, "We should hurry and finish. If those are Vietnam soldiers, we don't want to be caught out here." The voices stopped just as abruptly as they'd started, and a hush fell over the place. Grandma felt her heart quicken, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of uncertainty. They packed up quickly. Grandma took the heavier tools while Aunt Mai carried the lighter ones. Suddenly, the voices started again, but this time behind them. Aunt Mai whispered, "How can the voices be behind us? Nobody passed us." Grandma just shushed her eyes scanning the shadows, and urged her to keep moving. On their way home, they passed an old, weathered tombstone by the roadside. Grandma had mentioned it before, but no one knew whose grave it was. The air around it felt colder somehow, and the silence pressed in on them. Story 3. The Poltergeist Fright. One afternoon, Grandma, Aunt Mai, Aunt Lynn, Dad, and Uncle were at the garden again. They'd finished early and were resting after lunch. Grandma decided to visit her aunt nearby to chat, leaving Aunt Mai in charge of the others at the plot. Not long after she left, screams shattered the quiet, sharp, terrified cries that made Grandma's blood run cold. Then frantic footsteps raced toward her. Aunt Mai, Aunt Lynn, Dad, and Uncle, all trembling, clinging to her like she was their anchor. Grandma was upset, scolding them. "I told you to stay at the hut. What if someone stole our pots and dishes?" Dad replied, "We heard rustling in the bushes and laughter as soon as you left." Everyone, including Grandma's aunt, hurried back to the hut to check. Sure enough, their rice pot was missing. Grandma's voice was sharp with frustration. "Great. Those Vietnam soldiers probably took it when you all ran off." After searching, they found the pot a few yards behind the hut, nestled in the grain field. The rice inside was untouched. Grandma's eyes narrowed, and she picked up the pot, her voice rising in anger. "Oh, you're that hungry, huh? If you want the food, then take it and leave my children alone. You're mad because you're gone and not me, so terrorize me, but don't touch my kids, do you hear me?" She dumped the last of the rice onto the ground in a gesture of defiance and marched back to where everyone waited. That night, they chose to sleep at Grandma's aunt's hut instead of their own. When they returned the next day, everything was just as they left it. These stories have always fascinated me, not just because of the ghosts and strange noises, but because of the way Grandma faced them all with such bravery. She never let fear take hold, even when the unknown crept close. To her, those spirits were part of a deeper connection, a reminder of those who came before us, watching silently from the shadows. And though the garden holds its secrets, it's also a place of family, resilience, and courage. Hey there. I want to share a story from my childhood that stuck with me all these years. It's about the house my family lived in when I was a kid. More specifically, my bedroom there. You see, when I was about 8 years old, my parents moved us into our very first house. Before that, we lived in a trailer park mostly meant for senior citizens. It wasn't much, and honestly, the management there really didn't like having a kid around. That was just how life was for us, doing what we could to get by. Shortly after moving into that house, a lot changed. My parents divorced, and my mom moved out. Then my dad met a woman, let's call her Janet, and she moved in with her 3 daughters. So it was my dad, Janet, her 3 girls, and me, all under one roof. We stayed there for about 6 years. The first year or so, nothing really happened that we noticed, but then, around the second year, strange things began to unfold. Paranormal events, to be exact. At first, I didn't really experience much, but my dad did, and so did a few others. None of them knew the others were going through the same things until they all talked about it later. Now, for me, the only thing I really noticed in that bedroom were these awful dreams. They'd wake me up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath as if I'd just run a marathon. These weren't just nightmares. They felt different. The air in that room felt so heavy, so charged with this strange energy that I couldn't stand being there. Going into that room was like walking through an invisible wall, thick, suffocating air that pressed down on me. It got so bad that I refused to go in there for 3 whole months. I ended up sleeping on the living room couch, and if I needed something from my room, I'd bolt in, grab it as fast as I could, and get out. But then, toward the end of our time in that house, something truly bizarre happened. Something that I thankfully never saw, but that my dad and a couple of others did. By then, things were really falling apart at home. My dad and Janet were on the brink of divorcing. Janet was out most nights, drinking and using drugs, and honestly, she was with just about everyone in town. I was living with my mom by then because the house had become too much for me. My 2 older stepsisters had moved out somewhere, and the youngest stepsister was rarely home, usually staying with someone else. So, most of the time, it was just my dad and Janet in the house, even though Janet was gone a lot. Despite everything, my dad kept his job. He was a garbage man who had to wake up at 3 a.m. to start his shift at 4. He'd usually be back by 9 or 10 in the morning, having zipped through his route. But when he came home, he often found men Janet had brought over hopping out of windows, usually from my bedroom. So he nailed every window in the house shut. He even started sleeping on the couch because he didn't want to sleep in the same bed as Janet, knowing she was cheating on him. He told me about the nightmares he had while sleeping on that couch. He'd dream of being surrounded by starving children from some faraway place, all reaching out to him with worms crawling out of their mouths and noses. It was terrifying for him, and it seemed the house itself was feeding on that fear. Then one night, he was woken up by a loud slam. He jumped up, thinking Janet was there with someone else, but the house was empty. The door to my bedroom, which had been open, suddenly slammed shut and started shaking like something was trying to get out. He grabbed a baseball bat he kept next to the couch and cautiously walked down the hall. As he neared my room, he heard both windows, still nailed shut, opening and slamming shut violently, and my closet doors doing the same. The bedroom door kept shaking, rattling in its frame. He called out Janet's name, asking if it was her, and then, suddenly, all the noise stopped. He slowly opened the door and looked inside. The room was empty. Both windows were still nailed shut, and the closet doors were closed. But the moment he stepped out, the door slammed shut behind him, and the noise started up again. He fled to the living room, turned the TV on full blast to drown out the sounds, and stayed there until he had to leave for work at 4 a.m. This happened several times, each night more unnerving than the last. Later, when my dad ran into Janet at a bar, they found themselves oddly on better terms, having already decided their marriage was over. She was the first to mention that she'd experienced the same thing he had. The door slamming, the windows banging, the eerie shaking. Then, a few nights after that, my dad let an older friend crash at the house. The next day, the friend asked him why someone had been in my bedroom slamming the doors all night too. It's strange to think about how all of us, my dad, Janet, and this friend, were haunted by the same disturbances, completely unaware of each other's experiences until much later. That bedroom held something dark and restless, and I'm just grateful I never saw it firsthand. Eventually, we left that house behind, but the memories of that thick, suffocating air and those chilling nights linger. It's one of those stories that's hard to explain, but it's real, and it shaped a part of my childhood in a way nothing else ever did. want to share with you some eerie experiences I had growing up in my childhood home, particularly ones involving my best friend at the time, whose name was Jake. We were inseparable, neighbors just a block apart, so it was common for him to stay over or for me to crash at his place. One night, Jake was over at my house, and my dad was the only other person there. We both had been sleeping in my room. Back then, we could both fit comfortably in my bed. Suddenly, I woke up to find Jake standing between me and the door. He was facing away from me, and the hallway light spilled in through the half-open door, casting elongated shadows across the room. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the grogginess. "Hey, Jake, are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart starting to race in the stillness. He turned slightly and said, "Someone just poured something on me." I immediately jumped out of bed, half joking but also worried. Did you pee the bed?" He shot me a sharp look and snapped, "No." He explained he woke up feeling water being poured right around his groin area. Then, as whoever it was left, he heard a deep, booming laugh echoing down the hall. A man's voice, but not my dad's. And he said it was a lot of water. I looked down and saw the bed was soaked, but the liquid was clear and cold, definitely not urine. It had soaked through the sheets, the mattress, and even the plywood beneath it, dripping steadily onto the floor. The sound of the drops hitting the floor was unnervingly loud in the quiet night. We searched the entire house, calling out, checking every room, but no one was there besides the three of us. My dad was sound asleep, and honestly, he wouldn't have done something like that anyway. Then there was another odd night with Jake. He woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, which was on the other side of the house. When he came back into the dark living room, he said he heard my stepmom call his name. He spun around, and in the pitch-black room, he saw the silhouette of a person sitting on the couch. Naturally, he thought it was her. She asked him quietly if he could go home. Confused but obedient, he agreed and left. The next morning, I woke up annoyed that Jake wasn't there anymore and went to his house to find out what happened. That's when he told me about the strange encounter. I confronted my stepmom later that day, but she denied ever telling him to go home. I've never fully trusted her, so I still wonder about what really happened that night. Was it really her or something else? The last incident with Jake was one of the most unsettling. He woke up thirsty and got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen, which was on the opposite side of the house. He grabbed a clean glass from the cupboard, filled it at the sink, then went and sat down on the living room couch to drink. Back then, our TV was an old-fashioned one without a remote. You had to physically press the power button on the TV itself. While Jake was sitting there, half asleep and confused, the TV suddenly flicked on by itself. He watched the screen for a minute, trying to make sense of it, before realizing it shouldn't have turned on. He got up, took his half-drunk glass of water back to the kitchen, set it down on the counter, and then went back to my bedroom to sit quietly on the floor until morning. He said he never heard anyone else get up or move around the house during that time, just the TV turning itself off at some point. When morning came, Jake went back to the kitchen and saw something even stranger. His glass was gone from the counter and was now sitting upside down in the dish rack. He had no idea who could have done that. Looking back, these experiences were frightening but also strangely captivating. They left this lingering sense that our home held secrets, whispers from a world just beyond our understanding. I still wonder about those nights, about the unseen presence that seemed to interact with Jake, and sometimes I feel a shiver just thinking about it. Hey there. I want to share a story that's really close to my heart. It's about a house I grew up in, a house with a history that feels like it's woven with shadows and whispers. Let me take you back a bit to when my dad bought this house back in 1987. Now, the folks who lived there before us were a couple who'd only owned it for about 6 months. They told my parents they had to sell because the husband's uncle had left him a big property, and they were moving there. Sounded simple enough, but here's where things start getting a little strange. After we moved in, one of the older neighbors across the street, an elderly man who became good friends with my dad, pulled him aside and shared a story, something the previous owners hadn't mentioned. He said the real reason that couple bought the house and then sold it so quickly wasn't some inheritance or a new property. It was the house itself. Apparently, it had a way of messing with people's lives. The couple before them had been happy at first, but after a few years, their relationship started to crumble, tension filling the air. One night, during a fierce argument, the wife stormed out into the front yard. The husband locked the door behind her. She couldn't get back in, so she took a desperate leap through the big living room window. Tragically, she bled out on the floor. That was the end of that chapter. The husband then sold the house to the couple that sold it to us. Now, I've never done deep research to confirm the story about the wife diving through the window, but I do believe whatever was haunting our house had a real effect, because my dad and stepmom's marriage also felt the strain, especially as time went on. We didn't notice anything too odd right away. Maybe the first year or so, things were pretty normal. But by the second year, little things started happening here and there, enough to make us question what was going on. I remember the very first thing that freaked us all out, as a family of 6. We were pretty close, and we often went out together, taking trips to parks or friends' houses on nice weekends. Picture this. Dad would lock the front door, deadbolt and handle, then come to get in the car. But every single time, by the moment he reached the car, the front door was just standing wide open. No breeze, no explanation. He'd go back, lock it again, and it would be open once more when he returned. I remember us driving away, glancing back at the front door, wide open like some silent invitation or warning. It was eerie and confusing all at once. And weirdly, when we came back, the door was always locked tight again. One time, we came home to find the refrigerator door and freezer wide open. But it wasn't just that. They had thrown food all over the kitchen, the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. It was like some invisible force was making a mess just for us. My stepmom was the kind of person who liked order. She had everything in the kitchen set just so, the dishes, the silverware. But she'd often complain the silverware drawer was always rearranged, even though none of us touched it. It was like the house itself was playing tricks, or maybe trying to communicate. Now, my middle stepsister and I were really close. Same age, lots of talks, especially on our walks to and from school. One morning, around 1990, when we were in 3rd or 4th grade, she told me something that sent chills down my spine. She and some friends had played with a Ouija board in her bedroom. They contacted a spirit, a 16-year-old boy named Keith Zeus, with blonde hair and blue eyes. He said he was buried under our house. Now, our house had a slab foundation, so if someone were buried there, it would have had to be before the house was built. She said he kept asking her to be his girlfriend, and she kept saying no. Even then, I knew she was smart not to say yes. Who knows what might have happened if she did? I never thought Keith was a normal human spirit. It felt off. I never told my friends about it, and she never mentioned it to anyone else either. It faded into the background of my mind until years later, in 10th grade, around 1996, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I was sitting next to a girl at school, someone I'd known since 5th grade, but who had never been to my house and didn't know my family. We were passing notes back and forth when she told me she'd used a Ouija board over the weekend. And get this, she said she spoke with a 16-year-old boy who kept asking her to be his girlfriend. Suddenly, everything my stepsister had told me years before flashed in my mind. I wrote back the details my sister had shared, and I handed the note back. When I looked at her, she was pale as a sheet. She dropped the note and asked how I knew all that. I told her the story, and she said the only difference was that the boy told her he was buried under a house somewhere in the city, not specifically ours. Now, I can't say for sure if she'd heard the story before and just forgot, or if she was messing with me. But I've searched endlessly online for any record of a Keith Zeus, spelling it every way imaginable, and found nothing. What really gets me is why this spirit, if it was one, would tell my sister our house was where he was buried, and then tell this other girl it was just some house in the city. It feels like a deliberate confusion, like he didn't want anyone to know the truth. If there really is a body buried under that house, I'd want to know. But I'm not about to buy the place just to tear it down looking for answers. Honestly, I think the house itself should be destroyed. It's left a mark on everyone who's lived there, and sometimes, the past is best left buried. Hey, I want to share with you some eerie experiences I had growing up in my childhood home, particularly ones involving my best friend at the time, whose name was Jake. We were inseparable, neighbors just a block apart, so it was common for him to stay over or for me to crash at his place. One night, Jake was over at my house, and my dad was the only other person there. We both had been sleeping in my room. Back then, we could both fit comfortably in my bed. Suddenly, I woke up to find Jake standing between me and the door. He was facing away from me, and the hallway light spilled in through the half-open door, casting elongated shadows across the room. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the grogginess. "Hey, Jake, are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart starting to race in the stillness. He turned slightly and said, "Someone just poured something on me." I immediately jumped out of bed, half joking but also worried. Did you pee the bed?" He shot me a sharp look and snapped, "No!" He explained he woke up feeling water being poured right around his groin area. Then, as whoever it was left, he heard a deep, booming laugh echoing down the hall. A man's voice, but not my dad's. And he said it was a lot of water. I looked down and saw the bed was soaked, but the liquid was clear and cold, definitely not urine. It had soaked through the sheets, the mattress, and even the plywood beneath it, dripping steadily onto the floor. The sound of the drops hitting the floor was unnervingly loud in the quiet night. We searched the entire house, calling out, checking every room, but no one was there besides the three of us. My dad was sound asleep, and, honestly, he wouldn't have done something like that anyway. Then there was another odd night with Jake. He woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, which was on the other side of the house. When he came back into the dark living room, he said he heard my stepmom call his name. He spun around, and in the pitch-black room, he saw the silhouette of a person sitting on the couch. Naturally, he thought it was her. She asked him quietly if he could go home. Confused but obedient, he agreed and left. The next morning, I woke up annoyed that Jake wasn't there anymore and went to his house to find out what happened. That's when he told me about the strange encounter. I confronted my stepmom later that day, but she denied ever telling him to go home. I've never fully trusted her, so I still wonder about what really happened that night. Was it really her, or something else? The last incident with Jake was one of the most unsettling. He woke up thirsty and got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen, which was on the opposite side of the house. He grabbed a clean glass from the cupboard, filled it at the sink, then went and sat down on the living room couch to drink. Back then, our TV was an old-fashioned one without a remote. You had to physically press the power button on the TV itself. While Jake was sitting there, half asleep and confused, the TV suddenly flicked on by itself. He watched the screen for a minute, trying to make sense of it, before realizing it shouldn't have turned on. He got up, took his half-drunk glass of water back to the kitchen, set it down on the counter, and then went back to my bedroom to sit quietly on the floor until morning. He said he never heard anyone else get up or move around the house during that time, just the TV turning itself off at some point. When morning came, Jake went back to the kitchen and saw something even stranger. His glass was gone from the counter and was now sitting upside down in the dish rack. He had no idea who could have done that. Looking back, these experiences were frightening, but also strangely captivating. They left this lingering sense that our home held secrets, whispers from a world just beyond our understanding. I still wonder about those nights, about the unseen presence that seemed to interact with Jake, and sometimes I feel a shiver just thinking about it. Hey there. I want to share a story that's really close to my heart. It's about a house I grew up in, a house with a history that feels like it's woven with shadows and whispers. Let me take you back a bit to when my dad bought this house back in 1987. Now, the folks who lived there before us were a couple who'd only owned it for about 6 months. They told my parents they had to sell because the husband's uncle had left him a big property, and they were moving there. Sounded simple enough. But here's where things start getting a little strange. After we moved in, one of the older neighbors across the street, an elderly man who became good friends with my dad, pulled him aside and shared a story, something the previous owners hadn't mentioned. He said the real reason that couple bought the house and then sold it so quickly wasn't some inheritance or a new property. It was the house itself. Apparently, it had a way of messing with people's lives. The couple before them had been happy at first, but after a few years, their relationship started to crumble, tension filling the air. One night, during a fierce argument, the wife stormed out into the front yard. The husband locked the door behind her. She couldn't get back in, so she took a desperate leap through the big living room window. Tragically, she bled out on the floor. That was the end of that chapter. The husband then sold the house to the couple that sold it to us. Now, I've never done deep research to confirm the story about the wife diving through the window. But I do believe whatever was haunting our house had a real effect, because my dad and stepmom's marriage also felt the strain, especially as time went on. We didn't notice anything too odd right away. Maybe the first year or so, things were pretty normal. But by the second year, little things started happening here and there, enough to make us question what was going on. I remember the very first thing that freaked us all out as a family of 6. We were pretty close, and we often went out together, taking trips to parks or friends' houses on nice weekends. Picture this. Dad would lock the front door, deadbolt and handle, then come to get in the car. But every single time, by the moment he reached the car, the front door was just standing wide open. No breeze, no explanation. He'd go back, lock it again, and it would be open once more when he returned. I remember us driving away, glancing back at the front door, wide open like some silent invitation or warning. It was eerie and confusing all at once. And weirdly, when we came back, the door was always locked tight again. One time, we came home to find the refrigerator door and freezer wide open. But it wasn't just that. They had thrown food all over the kitchen, the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. It was like some invisible force was making a mess just for us. My stepmom was the kind of person who liked order. She had everything in the kitchen set just so, the dishes, the silverware, but she'd often complain the silverware drawer was always rearranged, even though none of us touched it. It was like the house itself was playing tricks, or maybe trying to communicate. Now, my middle stepsister and I were really close. Same age, lots of talks, especially on our walks to and from school. One morning, around 1990, when we were in 3rd or 4th grade, she told me something that sent chills down my spine. She and some friends had played with a Ouija board in her bedroom. They contacted a spirit, a 16-year-old boy named Keith Zeus with blonde hair and blue eyes. He said he was buried under our house. Now, our house had a slab foundation, so if someone were buried there, it would have had to be before the house was built. She said he kept asking her to be his girlfriend, and she kept saying no. Even then, I knew she was smart not to say yes. Who knows what might have happened if she did? I never thought Keith was a normal human spirit. It felt off. I never told my friends about it, and she never mentioned it to anyone else either. It faded into the background of my mind until years later, in 10th grade, around 1996, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I was sitting next to a girl at school, someone I'd known since 5th grade, but who had never been to my house and didn't know my family. We were passing notes back and forth when she told me she'd used a Ouija board over the weekend. And get this, she said she spoke with a 16-year-old boy who kept asking her to be his girlfriend. Suddenly, everything my stepsister had told me years before flashed in my mind. I wrote back the details my sister had shared, and I handed the note back. When I looked at her, she was pale as a sheet. She dropped the note and asked how I knew all that. I told her the story, and she said the only difference was that the boy told her he was buried under a house somewhere in the city, not specifically ours. Now, I can't say for sure if she'd heard the story before and just forgot, or if she was messing with me. But I've searched endlessly online for any record of a Keith Zeus, spelling it every way imaginable, and found nothing. What really gets me is why this spirit, if it was one, would tell my sister our house was where he was buried, and then tell this other girl it was just some house in the city. It feels like a deliberate confusion, like he didn't want anyone to know the truth. If there really is a body buried under that house, I'd want to know. But I'm not about to buy the place just to tear it down looking for answers. Honestly, I think the house itself should be destroyed. It's left a mark on everyone who's lived there, and sometimes the past is best left buried. Hey there. I want to share a story from my childhood home that's always stayed with me, especially this chapter of it when things were already pretty rough, but not yet at their worst. So, my stepmom had a bit of a wild streak back then. She was out partying and running around behind my dad's back. After a lot of talking, they decided to try and patch things up, so she promised to clean up her act and start going to church again. And here's the kicker. She said she'd take us kids along, which was honestly the last thing any of us wanted. I think this was around the 4th or 5th year we'd been living there, so we're talking maybe 1992 or 1993. She checked out a few different churches, trying to find one that felt right, but nothing quite stuck, until she stumbled upon the Mormon church. She loved it, and that's where we all ended up going. Funny enough, out of all those places she dragged us to, that was the only one I didn't hate, though even then, I was pretty meh about organized religion. Honestly, those experiences at church as a kid kind of shaped my view on religion in a not-so-great way. One thing I will say about the Mormons, though, they were genuinely kind people, welcoming, like they really accepted everyone. Because of that, they sent us some missionaries to give us weekly lessons and just hang out. I can't remember the names of the first 2 guys, but they were amazing. One was from a place full of cornfields somewhere in the Midwest, and the other was a surfer dude from California who was into AC/DC, my favorite band, by the way, so we had tons to talk about. They had this setup where they'd stop by our house last after their other visits, just to hang with us kids. They'd ditch their ties, grab a ball, and take us outside to play or chase each other around. They really were a bright spot in what was otherwise a pretty dark time for me. Now, this all happened before my dad had to nail the windows shut because of all the weird stuff going on. My oldest stepsister had even fixed the window in her room so she could sneak in and out at night whenever she wanted. We all knew about it, but no one did anything about it until Dad finally sealed it up later. One afternoon, the missionaries came over for a lesson, but only my stepmom and I were home. She was busy in the kitchen doing something, and the missionaries were setting up in the living room. I headed to the bathroom, which was right across the hall from my stepsister's bedroom. Yes, the one with the window she'd rigged. When I came out of the bathroom, I glanced over, and my heart just dropped. The entire inside of her window was crawling with hundreds of giant houseflies. They weren't buzzing or flying around. They were just there, moving slowly across every inch of the glass. It reminded me of that creepy scene from the Amityville Horror. You know the one? I walked through the living room and told my stepmom what I'd seen. She came with me to check it out herself, and sure enough, there they were. She said she'd go around to the back and open the window from the outside to let the flies out. She left, and I sat on the couch watching the missionaries finish their setup. She came back pretty quickly, looking confused. "They're not there," she said. I asked, "You let them out?" And she said, "No, when I opened the window, they weren't there at all." We walked back to the bedroom together. Not a single fly in sight. Just empty, silent room. Right then, the missionaries suddenly jumped up, said they had to leave, and just took off, leaving all their stuff behind. It was so sudden and strange. After that, I never heard them bring up the flies, and whenever I saw them later, they wouldn't talk about it. To this day, I have no idea what really happened that afternoon, but it's one of those moments that just sticks with me, you know? Thanks for listening to this little piece of my past. Sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones that shape us the most. Hey there. I want to share with you a story that's been part of my life for quite some time. About Spirit Lake, a small town just north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's a place wrapped in mystery and stories that chill you to the bone, but also stories that feel oddly warm and human. So pull up a chair and let me take you through the whispers and shadows of Spirit Lake. Now, before we dive into the spooky stuff, let me set the scene for you. Spirit Lake isn't your typical small town. It's got history that runs deep, much of it passed down by word of mouth. The lake itself got its name long before settlers arrived, a name given by the Kootenai tribe, who once called this land home. The tribes here had a lot of conflict, always at odds with one another. But there's this one story, a tale of love and tragedy that folks around here still talk about. So the chief of one tribe promised his daughter, the princess, in marriage to the prince of the enemy tribe to bring peace. But here's the heartbreaking part. The princess was already deeply in love with a warrior from her own tribe. Imagine the pain she must have felt, caught between duty and love. Unable to bear the thought of this forced union, the young lovers went down to the lake one evening, hand in hand, and jumped into the cold water together, choosing death over separation. They drowned, and legend says their spirits never left. People claim that on misty nights, you can see the two of them drifting silently in a canoe, shrouded in fog, forever bound to Spirit Lake. That's where the lake gets its name, a place of spirits. But the lake's stories don't end there. It's strange, really, because I've fished at many lakes up north, and none have nearly the number of memorials and graves that Spirit Lake has. It's eerie, almost unsettling. I know of 3 particular stories of deaths in the lake that people still whisper about. The first one is about a little boy, only 7 years old, who was swimming in what seemed like harmless, shallow water. He got tangled in some weeds and drowned. Now, I've always wondered about this. The lake's bottom is muddy, and plants don't really take root there. So how did these weeds trap him? Maybe he panicked. Or maybe something unseen held him under. It's hard to say. Then there's the story of a high school party. You know the kind. Backwoods and secretive, with a bonfire and whispers of trouble. One junior got drunk and slipped into the water without anyone hearing a sound. The area echoes sound so well, it's strange no one noticed. Was he pushed as a joke, or did he fall quietly? Or was there something else pulling him under? It's a mystery that still haunts the locals. The last story I know is darker. A drug deal gone wrong between two teenagers fighting over money. It was winter, and one of them was pushed into the icy, shallow water, trapped beneath the ice. Most memorials around the lake are for young men like these, and that adds to the sorrow hanging in the air. Adding to this heavy energy, there were negative witches who once lived in Spirit Lake. They were known for disturbing rituals, animal sacrifices, and strange, unsettling ceremonies. In the 60s, they'd stop travelers on the highway late at night, trying to pull them into their beliefs. Even now, some say they're still around. I lived just 2 houses down from one such family, and sometimes I'd wake up to chanting that had no connection to any moon phase or season. It was chilling. The women in those families were often kept inside, forbidden to leave, while the men, the father and uncle, were, well, perverse. They dressed like old-time farmers, in browns, grays, and blacks, and the women wore bonnets, like something out of a haunting. And every Halloween, more animals go missing in Spirit Lake than anywhere else nearby. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the darkness lingering here. Spirit Lake began as a logging town, but it didn't thrive for long. The old buildings still stand, silent witnesses to the past. The old movie theater turned florist, the White Horse Saloon, a rundown building near the elementary school, a greenhouse by the park, and a commercial building behind the hardware store that was recently torn down. Many locals claim their homes are haunted, not just by dark spirits, but sometimes by friendly ones too. The community here is full of good, honest church folks who openly accept the presence of ghosts and pray for protection every day, not just for themselves, but for their neighbors. Nearby, there are 2 mountains, Rathdrum and Hoodoo, which are also hotspots for paranormal and even alien activity. People have reported strange lights, ghost sightings, and even Bigfoot encounters. I've hunted in those wild areas many times myself, and while I haven't seen any ghosts, I can understand how Bigfoot could hide there. The wilderness is vast, full of hidden pockets and shadows perfect for something elusive. Personally, I haven't had any outright paranormal experiences in Spirit Lake. There was one day when I was feeling really down, walking through the woods, and the forest felt more comforting and reassuring than usual. Maybe it was just my love for nature, but it felt like the woods were wrapping me in a gentle embrace. I know others who have seen things, though. People who are honest, old-fashioned, church-going folks I trust. I do think the high drug use in the area might fuel some of the strange happenings. Sometimes the energy feels heavy, charged with sorrow and dark deeds, and I believe that those troubled souls might be feeding the paranormal activity. Some things about Spirit Lake are just complicated and beyond simple explanations. So, that's the story of Spirit Lake, a place where love and loss, darkness and light, all mingle beneath the misty surface. It's a town of ghosts, of memories, and of people who keep praying for peace amid the shadows. Thanks for listening to this tale from my corner of Idaho. Maybe someday, if you're brave enough, you'll visit Spirit Lake and see if you can catch a glimpse of that ghostly canoe drifting through the fog. Hi everyone. I want to start by saying that what I'm about to tell you really happened. I do believe there are things in this world we don't fully understand, but I'm not someone who accepts every strange sound or odd feeling as paranormal right away. I usually try to explain things first. I look for the normal answer before I let my mind wander into the darker corners. That's actually why this experience has stayed with me so strongly. I live just outside Boston, in an old brick apartment building that went up sometime in the late 1880s. It has narrow hallways, heavy doors, old pipes, and that kind of tired silence that settles into a place after more than a century of people coming and going. There have been accidents here, deaths, even one violent crime that I know of. I've lived in my one-bedroom apartment since 2021, and during that time, I've had more strange experiences than I can neatly explain. There's been a clicking sound that seems to move around with people. My neighbor has heard it too. I've smelled perfume when no one else was around. I once saw what looked like a woman's arm in an old-fashioned sleeve, just for a second, and then it was gone. But the bathroom is where things feel the strongest. I've always sensed something feminine there. I know how that sounds, but there are moments when the feeling is so clear that it's almost like standing near an actual person. Not seeing her exactly, but feeling her mood, her presence. And for whatever reason, she does not seem to like it when I shower late at night. After 10 p.m. especially, the bathroom can feel hostile. There have been nights when I'm in the shower and suddenly get this sharp, awful feeling that something angry is standing just on the other side of the curtain, waiting. So on this night, it was a little after 11. I was sitting on my bed, alone, playing guitar. Earlier, I had said out loud, mostly to myself, that the yellow guitar pick I was using was my favorite. I don't know why I said it. Just one of those little thoughts you speak into the room without thinking. Eventually, I decided I should shower before it got any later. I put my guitar away, then set the yellow pick on the bed between two blue picks. I remember doing this very clearly. Yellow in the middle, blue on either side. Then I got undressed and walked into the bathroom wearing only my underwear. The bathroom is tiny and windowless. There's barely enough room to move around comfortably. Next to the shower, there's a tall linen cabinet, and between that cabinet and the shower curtain is this narrow little gap, maybe 3 inches wide. I grabbed a towel and crouched down to put it on the floor like I always do. As I did that, I nudged the shower curtain back slightly. And then I heard something small and plastic drop into that narrow gap beside me. It was a very specific sound, a little click against the floor. I froze for a second, then pushed the curtain aside and looked down. There, sitting in the gap beside the shower, was my yellow guitar pick. My favorite yellow guitar pick. I just stared at it. Then I said out loud, "No way." Though honestly, I used a stronger word than that. I picked it up and immediately started trying to explain it. Maybe it wasn't the sound I thought I heard, but there was nothing else in the gap. Maybe the pick had stuck to my clothes somehow, except I was barely wearing anything. Maybe it had stuck to my hand, but I would have felt that. And anyway, I knew I had placed it on the bed. I walked back into my bedroom, still holding the pick, still saying, "No way," over and over. Part of me was thinking, maybe I had another yellow pick. Maybe one had somehow been caught in the shower curtain for days and just happened to fall at that exact moment. But when I looked at the bed, the two blue picks were still there. The yellow one was gone. It was the same pick, the one I had just been using, the one I had placed between the two blue picks. Somehow it had moved from my bed to the bathroom and dropped into that narrow little gap right beside me while my face was less than 2 feet away from it. I still don't know what to do with that. It didn't roll in there. It didn't fall from a shelf. It didn't come from my clothes. It was on my bed, and then it was in the bathroom. After a minute, I said out loud, "I'm still taking a shower." And I did. I wish I could say I was calm about it, but I wasn't. I spent the whole shower trying not to look too hard at the curtain, trying not to imagine someone standing behind it, trying not to think about the fact that something had just taken an object from my room and dropped it beside me like it wanted my attention. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, but I haven't been able to explain it. I've gone over every possibility I can think of, and none of them work. This is just one more strange thing in a long list of things that have happened in this apartment. Or maybe I should say our apartment, because at this point, it really doesn't feel like I'm living here alone. Some things can be reasoned away. This wasn't one of them. I've worked as an embalmer for a little over 35 years, and that is about as much as I'll say about the job itself. But there are two things that happened during my career that changed the way I think about death, about faith, and about whatever might be waiting on the other side. I was raised Christian, and I still consider myself a believer. But these two moments shook me in a way I still don't fully know how to explain. I've kept them quiet for years because I honestly didn't know how people would react. Maybe they'd laugh. Maybe they'd think I was exaggerating. Maybe they'd say I imagined it. But I didn't imagine it. And I think I'm finally ready to say it out loud. The first incident happened late one night, close to 2:30 in the morning. I had just finished my work. There were several bodies in the preparation room, all covered neatly with clean white sheets. The room was quiet in that heavy way a funeral home gets after midnight, when every little sound feels too loud. I took off my gown and gloves, washed up, and walked toward the door. I remember reaching for the light switch, already thinking about going home. And then, something pushed me. But it wasn't like a hand. It wasn't a shove to the shoulder or a hit between the shoulder blades. This was different. It felt like an entire wall of pressure pressed into me at once, from the back of my head all the way down to my heels. Every part of me moved forward together. It pushed me about a foot. That was enough. I ran. I didn't stop to check the room. I didn't turn around. I went straight through the garage door, got into my silver Honda Civic, and drove home faster than I probably should have. When I got inside my apartment, I sat down in my living room chair and started praying out loud. I remember saying, "Jesus, I don't know what I did. I don't know if I offended you, or if something in that room was angry with me, but I am sorry. I am truly sorry." While I was saying it, I looked down at my arm. The hairs were standing straight up, not just a few of them, all of them. My skin had this strange, raised, prickled look to it, almost like it didn't belong to me for a second. I had never seen my body react that way before. The second incident happened more than 20 years later in a completely different funeral home. It was around 9:15 at night. I had gone in to do some work, which is normal in that profession. You learn quickly that the clock doesn't matter much. Sometimes you work in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the night. I was in the prep room, finished what I needed to do, and took off my gown and gloves. Then I walked down the hallway to the small break room to grab a bottle of water from the little refrigerator. On my way back, I was walking down a long hallway. At the far end, there was a mirror. Behind me, near the front of the building, was a glass door with the outside light shining through it. As I walked toward the mirror, I saw someone behind me. A figure came up to the glass door, turned slightly, and stopped. I saw it clearly in the mirror. For a second, my mind tried to make it normal. Maybe someone was outside. Maybe a family member had come back. Maybe it was a coworker. I took another step or two. Then, I turned around. No one was there, and I screamed. The moment I screamed, it screamed too. But it wasn't just an echo. It was my scream, my exact voice. Same pitch, same fear, same breath. I ran out of the building and stood in the parking lot, shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. And even outside, I could still hear it screaming. That's the part I can't get over. It had copied me. It had taken my voice and thrown it back into the dark. I grew up in a small rural town in northern Maine, the kind of place where the nights are still, the roads are empty, and anything unusual feels twice as strange because nothing much ever happens. About 12 years ago, during one summer, I started noticing these orange lights blinking out in the potato fields. They weren't flashing fast or moving around, at least not from what I could tell. They just sort of pulsed every now and then, calm and bright, like some piece of farm equipment left out after dark. That's what I told myself anyway. One evening, my father and I decided to take the four-wheelers out for a ride. Just the two of us. We rode around for hours, wandering the trails, not paying attention to the time, until suddenly, the sky had gone dark around us. We stopped on the trail to talk about which way we should head home, and that's when I saw one of those orange lights again. It was way off in a field, blinking softly like it had been waiting there. I got excited, honestly. Not much happens up there, so even a strange light in a field felt like a mystery worth chasing. I told my dad I had been seeing those lights around and asked him what he thought it was. He looked at it for a while and said he had never seen anything like that before. He figured maybe it was equipment, but he didn't sound convinced. I told him I wanted to go check it out, and he agreed. So we rode toward it. As we got closer, I started feeling uneasy. I couldn't see any tractor, no machine, no post, nothing that the light could have been attached to. It was just this orange glow, blinking slowly in the dark. The light was about the size of one of those big rubber balls they used to sell in bins at grocery stores when you were a kid. Not tiny, not huge, just big enough that you knew you were looking at something real. Then I realized it was sitting right in the middle of the trail. At the time, I didn't fully process it, but looking back, it couldn't have been there when we first saw it. It must have moved while we were riding toward it, because the spot where we first noticed it was not the same spot where we ended up. And that's when the nervous feeling really sank in. There wouldn't be a random pole in the middle of an ATV trail with an orange light on it. That made no sense. The whole field around us was pitch black, except for two old four-wheelers, each with one foggy headlight, and that glowing orange orb. The stars were faint overhead. Everything else was just darkness and rows of fields stretching out farther than I could see. We pulled right up to where the light was blinking. It pulsed once in front of us. Then it disappeared. My dad and I shut off the four-wheelers. Everything went dead quiet. I remember asking him, "Where did it go? It was supposed to be right here." We were parked exactly where it had just been. There was nothing there. No equipment, no pole, no reflection. Nothing. Before my dad could answer, he suddenly gasped and said, "Oh crap." I turned and saw it behind us. The orange light had somehow appeared about 10 feet away, off the trail now, floating out in the field. It blinked once, disappeared, then blinked again. Only this time it was closer. Maybe 3 feet closer. Neither of us said anything after that. We both knew right then that it wasn't stationary. It wasn't farm equipment. Something was wrong. And this is the part I still give my dad grief about to this day. He started his four-wheeler and took off, leaving me sitting there alone. I tried to follow him immediately, but I was still learning how to ride a manual four-wheeler, and I stalled it. Twice. I was panicking, trying to get the thing started while knowing that light was somewhere behind me. I looked back one last time. The orange orb was back in the trail, exactly where I had been. That was the worst part. It wasn't just nearby. It was right where I was. I finally got the four-wheeler moving, and I didn't look back again. I just drove as fast as I could until I caught up with my dad, and we went straight home without stopping. When we pulled in, I thought maybe he would laugh and tell me what it really was. Maybe he had figured it out. Maybe he had only acted scared to mess with me. But he got off his four-wheeler fast and headed straight for the house. I called out to him and asked, "What the hell was that?" He didn't turn it into a joke. He didn't explain it away. He just said, "I have no idea, but get in the house." Then he went inside. I was too scared to bring it up again that night. Honestly, I didn't really talk about it with him for years. Even now, he still swears he has no idea what we saw, and he doesn't like talking about it. My dad is a tough, no-nonsense, blue-collar guy, the kind of man who doesn't scare easily. But that night, I saw him scared. I did see the orange blinking light one more time later that summer, in a different field while I was driving past on the main road. After that, I never saw it again. I still don't know what we came across out there, and I really wish someone could tell me.